All right, we're ready to reconvene our meeting, and we will dive right into the Administrative Budget and Oversight Committee. With apologies, Mr. Regent Buchanan, that we're getting started so late.
No apologies needed. No apologies needed, and thank you. This convenes the Budget Committee meeting for today, which is a big agenda item. Let's see if we can get through it quickly. I would defer to Deputy Commissioner Robinson to introduce some of the consent items. Deputy Commissioner Robinson.
Mr. Chair and members of the board, with the agenda that we have in front of us for the Budget Committee, there's obviously the consent items that are being presented there. In our review of those particular items, we felt that that they could move forward as they are presented, unless you would want to specifically pull off any of those particular items. I would recommend that they be moved forward to tomorrow's action item as a total agenda, total consent agenda.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Robinson. Members of the committee, any items on there that you'd like to pull out for discussion today? You two chatting away are the committee. Any interest in pulling away any of the items out for discussion off of the consent agenda? All right. And it's the will of that committee there to move it forward for approval tomorrow? Thank you. So we'll be done. Moving on to the action item, item A. Is it the wish of Deputy Commissioner Robinson to go through these individually? I think it would be worth it to at least look at them individually.
Mr. Chairman, I think on the action items, yes, I think they would require some individual discussion. I think we can move through a lot of those fairly quickly. The beginning item, the biomass gasification steam plant proposal from the University of Montana, we have had the discussion and questions and answers around that particular project for a period of time now. First introduced, I believe, in the November meeting in Missoula, and we had some additional discussions January meeting. So I would ask President Engstrom if he would like to make some further introduction on this particular project.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Robinson. Mr. Chair, members of the board, we would like to take some time to discuss this item with you. We recognize that this is a particularly complex item and that a good deal of understanding is needed before you can make an informed decision on this item. So we want to take the time to do that, and I'll have Vice President Duringer lead that discussion. Before having him come up, let me just make some opening comments. Last time I made some comments about why we need to do this project, and I'd like to just re-emphasize a few things if I could. We, as the University of Montana and as a university in this country, have a responsibility and an obligation to work toward sustainability in an environmental sense, in an economic sense, and every other sense of that word. One of the biggest global issues of our time is the production of carbon dioxide and the impact that that has. As I mentioned before, we as an institution signed a declaration some years ago. Montana State University has also signed that same declaration to do everything in our power to reduce our carbon footprint. This project is the single most effective way of doing that. It will reduce our carbon footprint by something on the order of 24%, and you'll get the details of that in a moment. Now, if in the process of doing that, we had to spend a whole bunch more money, that would give us pause. I think that you'll see in the presentation that we can do this without spending a bunch more money. In fact, it's a cost savings or cost neutral at the bad end or at the high end. If we had to accomplish this by moving jobs out of Montana, that would give us pause. This project actually helps the job industry in Montana by making use of forest products that are a staple to Montana. If we had to accomplish this by increasing the level of pollutants of other types, that would give us pause. Again, you will see that the proposal here keeps every other pollutant well under the legal limit, at the same time increasing our effectiveness in diminishing the release of carbon. And so if we had to do this and sacrifice something about our educational mission, that would give us pause. The fact is, this will actually help our educational mission because we are building a classroom into this proposal and involving COT students in the running of this project. So from my point of view, then, Mr. Chairman, this is a way of us meeting our responsibility as an educational institution and doing it in the most responsible fashion that we possibly can. So it's an important thing to do, and I would say that this has been studied in great detail over the past several months, year and a half or more. It has had tremendous input from the public and still is getting input. I understand the controversial nature of this. So with that, I'm going to ask Vice President Duringer and his colleagues to help explain this project in a way that lets you gain comfort with the understanding of what is a very complicated issue. Bob, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, good afternoon. Let me start with saying that I fully understand and realize that the biomass project, in the minds of some, is a contentious issue. I've been privy to some, but certainly not all, of the letters and emails that you've been bombarded with recently. I hope this presentation today will put to rest all of that controversy. To lighten up the mood just a touch, I'd like to have a show of hands. Who's ever jumped out of an airplane with less than maybe their own full judgment of doing so? Well, the last three things you hear as you're getting ready to jump out is equipment check, stand in the door, and then go, go, go. So here we go. The biomass boiler idea began almost 2 years ago when Hugh Jesse, our Director of Facility Services, attended a conference with physical plant administrators in Vancouver. He came back with the idea of substituting wood for natural gas as our primary fuel source at the steam plant. After an in-depth study of the idea, this approach seemed to be an excellent fit with the commitment that then President Dennison had made to reduce UM's reliance on fossil fuels. Thus, we started the journey then that ends in Kalispell today. Beginning with the May 2010 board meeting, actually we came with an information item then, the board has given us a number of opportunities to provide you with progress reports on the project and to address a number of your questions. Today we will give you what amounts to a semi-final progress report, contingent on the final issuance of an air quality permit, something we anticipate receiving in the next couple weeks. We are here to ask for your approval to construct a biomass-fueled steam plant on the Missoula campus. Before we get into the numbers and technical specifications, I'd like to take a minute to review our objectives. Our number one objective was to demonstrate environmental leadership through action, not just through well-intentioned rhetoric. Reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and shrink our carbon footprint. Create local jobs in the forest products industry. Provide unique educational opportunities for students in the energy technician program at the COT and for forestry and conservation students in that college. And lastly, and this is writ large, to ensure that the new plant is totally compliant with both local and national air quality standards. In the materials that were sent to you earlier, there was a relatively long executive summary that spoke to many aspects of this project. There was also a detailed financial pro forma in your materials. So, given your existing knowledge of the project and our relatively short time together today, what I thought I'd do is touch briefly on several key points I'd like you to consider. After this overview, I have assembled a group of subject matter experts, who I'll introduce in a minute, to answer any of your questions. Okay. Point one, to comply with the Montana law that governs performance contracting, an investment-grade audit of the project must be conducted. The purpose of this audit is to determine if the projected energy savings and the consequent financial savings are realistic. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the investment-grade audit that was done. We conducted the audit and found the plant performance and cost savings to be achievable. We have chosen McKinstry as our performance contractor and Nextera, a global leader in the combustion technology industry, as our core equipment provider. Second, the Montana Department of Natural Resources conducted a study in April of this year, not at our prompting, I would add, to determine if there was adequate woody biomass available in the local forest to be used for fuel for this project. The study concluded that the 15,600 tons of biomass this new plant will use is a very, very small fraction of the biomass available in the 50-mile radius that we anticipate getting this fuel from. A comprehensive financial analysis of the project has been done to determine the viability of the project. Given our informed projections of the cost of natural gas, woody biomass, plant operating performance, and projected operating cost, the project is quite viable. But that is not to say that it is not without risk. Whenever you factor both weather and the prices of globally traded commodities into your plan, you introduce a certain amount of risk, that is for sure. For that reason, similar to our current budgeting practices for natural gas and electricity, we have created a biomass fuel risk reserve to accommodate price fluctuations in biomass. Every year, we will accumulate money in that account so that if something happens with biomass pricing, we're ready to take care of it. This is only prudent. As you may recall from our last progress report, we conducted extensive due diligence to confirm the operating characteristics of the proposed plant. This included hauling 100 tons of hog fuel from Superior up to Kamloops, British Columbia to conduct burn tests to make sure that it would burn correctly and we could measure on site what the emissions of those burns were. We've integrated the operations and maintenance of the plant into the curriculums of the Energy Technician program at the COT and in programs of the College in Forestry and Conservation, as we will be harvesting some of our wood from Lubrecht Experimental Forest. In the design of the plant, as President Engstrom indicated, we've included a classroom on site to facilitate the education of our students. We have negotiated a maximum guaranteed price and a multi-year performance guarantee from McKinstry and an extended warranty on parts and both labor from Nextera. We're in the final stage of being issued a draft air quality permit from the Missoula County Health Department. Once this permit is final, we will have met all regulatory requirements. This is the permit application. We have completed an environmental analysis as described in the Montana Environmental Protection Act, or MEPA. That analysis is now on our website and out for public comment. This is the document. The project will reduce UM's carbon footprint by approximately 22 to 24%. In plain terms, this is nearly 14,000 metric tons of CO2 per year. 14,000 metric tons. I also wanted to let you know that during our work on the biomass project, we discovered that the exhaust stack height on two of our existing older boilers, the last one being installed in 1968, they were not in compliance with the new 2006 emission standards. In working with the Department of Architecture and Engineering in Helena, they have offered $475,000 to help us devise a solution to this problem. We will bring this project to the board later on when we get ready to do that. Now, in terms of your question, please allow me to introduce the project team. For engineering questions, Tom Javins, a licensed practicing engineer in Missoula. Construction and project management, Tim Tolman from McKinstry. Independent air quality analysis, Jeff Chaffee from Bison Engineering. Financials, your own Rosie Keller from the University of Montana. Forest health and biomass availability, Angela Farr from the United States Forest Service. And David Nakarada on fuel acquisition and pricing from McKinstry. Also in attendance and available for questions, although not part of the team per se, is Ben Schmidt. Ben, where are you? There, right here. From the Missoula County Health Department, the permitting agency, and John Rohn, CEO of Nextera, our technology provider. As the leading expert in next generation combustion technology, I've asked John to give the board a brief overview of the technology that will be used. John. Just summary. Could you put his presentation up, please?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jonathan Rohn. I'm CEO of Nextera. And I live on the coast, and we haven't had spring yet, so it's great to get some vitamin D from Montana sunshine, so I'm grateful to be here today. I think there's a presentation coming up. There we go. Are you gonna click away for me? Okay, next slide. I've got a very brief presentation, just a little bit of background on our company and our technology, and a couple of projects that are relevant to the University of Montana project. Nextera, as Bob has said, we are a global leader in supply manufacture, service of biomass gasification systems that produce heat, power, and syngas at small scale for applications that go inside the fence. And we sell our systems around the world. We sell to public institutions like universities, hospitals. We also sell to industrial facilities. Our technology is fully proven commercially, and we're based in, although we're based in Vancouver, we have offices in Pennsylvania, in Atlanta, and we've just recently opened up in Brazil, and we'll shortly be opening up in Europe. And we've got about 70 direct employees. We employ hundreds of people indirectly through subcontract manufacturing. And we've got some very strong strategic partners. We've got a partnership on product development with GE. GE picked Nextera from about 100 gasification companies worldwide to develop a very unique application that we're going to be bringing to market shortly to produce heat and power at very high efficiency. There's a few pictures of projects that we've done, and I'll go through a few of them. So just a next slide, please. This is a very simple cartoon of our technology, and unlike a combustion system, what we do with our technology is we convert biomass into a synthetic gas. And synthetic gas is a very clean burning combustible gas that can be used very similar to natural gas to produce heat and power. And one of the things that, number of the interesting things about this technology is that compared to combustion, we have extremely low levels of emissions from the combustion of the syngas. The technology is very, very simple, and it is also extremely fuel flexible. It's very robust, and all of our systems are industrial grade quality. Next slide, please. What we do as a company is we combine our technology with fuel handling equipment, heat recovery equipment, power generation equipment to supply a complete turnkey system packages. And we provide performance guarantees on efficiency, on energy capacity, production, and emissions. And next slide, please. We've got a variety of different types of products. I won't go through them all, but we've got thermal systems that produce hot water, steam, power generation through steam turbines. We directly retrofit existing boilers so that they can run on syngas instead of natural gas. So it's a very, very growing, very fast-growing market for us. And we were recently recognized by Deloitte & Touche as one of the fastest-growing companies in North America. So a couple of slides on some projects. Next slide, please. I thought I'd show you a project that we completed last year in Prince George, British Columbia. Go to the next slide, actually. This is a project that we completed in Prince George, and there's some really similar characteristics. It's at the University of Northern British Columbia, and similar to Missoula, it's a forest products area. It's a very constrained valley, one of the most polluted airsheds in Canada, and the university they had a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they also wanted to create a bioenergy research and demonstration facility using the central heating plant as the catalyst for this. So we went through much the same discussions that we've been having with University of Montana, extensive due diligence, competitive process, and last year we started the plant up. And it displaces about 85% of the natural gas. It dramatically reduces the carbon footprint of the university, and as a consequence, if you click to the next slide, well, this is just shows you the inside of the system. We supplied all of the technology and equipment, fuel handling, gasification, heat recovery. It's got a full natural gas backup, just like with University of Montana. The existing heating plant will stay in place to operate as backup and for peaking. And if you go to the next slide, there's a picture of it. And on the upper right-hand side, there's the University of Northern British Columbia won the highest sustainability award this year, and they tied with Harvard University because of the introduction of this plant. And we recently had the Premier of British Columbia up to launch the facility. And they've got a living laboratory and a classroom built into the system. And to date, there's something of the order of 50 research projects that have been proposed by the students and faculty. And it's really acting as a catalyst for innovation in a hard-hit forest community. A couple other, well, and there's been a lot of discussion about emissions. This slide is a very simple slide that shows a couple of things. The green bars represent the permit emission level that are in the permit application for the University of Montana. And the blue bars represent the actual emissions from the plant at the University of Northern British Columbia. And I guess I'd just say that all of our facilities have met and exceeded their emissions levels. They've met and exceeded all of their performance requirements. There's been quite a bit of due diligence done with talking to our customers and learning about the operation of these facilities. So next slide, please. Just a couple other projects, and I'm happy to take some questions. This is a project that's recently won a Clinton Climate Initiative award. It's in downtown Victoria in British Columbia. It's right in the middle of a very expensive residential green development, and it's been operating for a number of years. Next slide. It's a project we were selected by the U.S. Department of Energy, with whom we have a partnership to supply a gasification system to heat DOE's Oak Ridge National Lab. It's their flagship national laboratory. We a very, very tough competitive process. NextEra was successful in that project. And final slide. This is my neighborhood in Vancouver, and this is a picture of the University of British Columbia. We have extremely high standards for air emissions in Vancouver. And this is the site of our first project that we're doing with GE, combined NextEra GE technology. And flip the next slide. This is what it's going to look like when it's completed. And it's a 2 megawatt combined heat and power plant, and it's going to be located about a mile from my house. And it's going to be again another center of research and innovation. And we're really seeing tremendous interest from the university community across North America for this type of solution, and I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Derringer. Thank you very much for your presentation.
I'm not quite done yet.
Perfect.
Okay.
What I would ask is, I clearly extensively prepared, and this is a topic that we've been discussing for a year, so I know that there are questions, and want to make sure that with the bulky agenda ahead of us, we're given time to not only address the questions related to this project, but the other ones that we're proposing today. So if we could, within a couple of minutes, get to the question portion, I would appreciate it.
90 seconds. Okay, I'm just about done. But before we open this up to comments and discussions, I've prepared 2 sets of concluding remarks. The question is, which do I use as my closer? The first closer is pretty simple. Thanks, we stand for questions. The second one goes like this. I've been the Vice President for Administration and Finance at the University of Montana for 10 years. Because of the staggered 7-year terms for regents, only Lynn Hamilton has had personal knowledge of what's transpired over that 10-year period. During that time, this board approved the financing and construction of the following: Lewis and Clark Village, a 462-bed apartment complex, a joint-use forestry Division of Biological Sciences laboratory. The construction of the math elevator had been our ADA project #1 list for more than 30 years. Skaggs Pharmacy Edition 1 and 2, a new interdisciplinary science building, the Payne Family Native American Center, the Phyllis Washington Education Building, the Law School Building, the Human Performance Lab, Washington Grizzly Stadium North and East additions, adding 6,000 seats to the stadium. Our team, some of whom are with me here today, devised the financing and managed the construction of all these projects. Together, they represent more than $160 million of new construction and renovation, and added 600,000 square feet to our campus. Each of these projects was successful. All of them came in on time, all of them came in on budget, and all of them came in above expectations. As Montanans like to say, the Biomass project isn't our first rodeo. We're ready to proceed, and we're ready to stand for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Derringer. You know, this process has been real interesting from a board member's perspective with the amount of time and preparation and thoroughness in preparation, coupled with the amount of public feedback that you as the folks hosting the conversation have fielded and I think very appropriately addressed. But I know that we as board members have had a ton of communication. And so with that, are there questions or further information that anybody on the board at the moment is seeking? Chairman, Regent Barrett.
I'm not on the committee, so. I mean, I guess I wanted to ask somebody, I think it'd probably be you, but sort of the obvious question that just popped up in the last day or two, which is, you know, we've gotten a lot of different emails, and it was not unanticipated that we would get a lot of comments. But as you know, within the last 2 days, we got a fairly lengthy, rather articulate letter from the gentleman that runs, not this plant, obviously this one doesn't exist, but the current system, and who's an employee, but stepped up and signed his name on it. You know, obviously took, whether he's right or wrong, you know, time will tell and we'll read about it, but obviously it took some thought to do that. How do we grapple with that letter? I mean, that's the person who's in the trenches that says, I'm not sure where we're going.
Good question. For some of you who know me, know that I was on the faculty at West Point for a number of years. And one of the courses that I taught was organizational change. And as you look at our steam plant and the fine crew that work there, those guys are very, very good at what they do. But they've also been working on the same equipment in the same way for more than 40 years. And so from an organizational change perspective, when we take their skill sets away from them, when we take the social structure away from them, and when we change what has been dependable and reliable for 40 years, anybody would be scared. So a lot of what Mr. Burke had to say was wrong. It's not his field. You know, he's quoted a lot of stuff that wasn't correct. But down underneath it, I see what's going on. Those guys they're glued together for many, many years of excellent work. And this new technology is radically different. That's my 2 cents of it.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan. 2 kind of follow-up questions along those same lines in a Missoulian editorial or column. There was some talk about overestimates of the cost of natural gas and some varying opinions as to where your natural gas comes from and how those costs might relate to the study that was done that was more East Coast based. And then the underestimates of diesel prices in trucking in the raw materials. And then the second question would be about the admissions, and it may have been covered in the earlier presentation, but if you could simplify that maybe to more layman's terminology, the difference in gas between the system's emissions and natural gas emissions, and is there really a 40% increase in the system emissions as was alleged in the article?
I'm going to ask David Nakarada to introduce or to talk to the fuel issues, and I'm going to ask Jeff Chaffee from Bison Engineering to talk to the emission issues. David?
Mr. Chairman, Regents, regarding natural gas, it's true that we are currently at a historic low. It's also true that in a very recent past, we were at historic highs. Everybody in the energy industry agrees it's very difficult or impossible to predict where energy, particularly fossil fuels, will be a week from now, a year from now. What we do know is this. Historically, the cost of natural gas has doubled, roughly doubled every 10 years. And although that's not a predictor of the future, it is an indication that in the energy field, most people agree that fossil fuel over time will continue to go up. So in looking at this program, and we're working with a number of institutions, it seemed reasonable, under much discussion by outside third-party sources as well, to take the high, historic high that we recently were at, the historic low, average them, and then apply a modest escalation that roughly averages out about 3% a year. Now, whether or not that's exactly correct is anyone's guess. But if you look historically, it was what was unanimously considered in the team a somewhat conservative approach. Conversely, biomass fuel, woody biomass, over the last 40 years has been comparatively and remarkably stable. There's one primary reason for that. It's biologically renewable. It grows back, unlike natural gas or diesel fuel, et cetera. So these are the things that we look at in terms of equating those differences. And that's how we're approaching all of these renewable energy projects. I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask just a specific question regarding the issue regarding $40 per ton for the acquisition of biomass is a very important part of the pro forma projection. And the only experience I have in terms of the biomass issue is connected with our University of Montana Western facility, which has been in operation, I think, for about 5 years. And originally, the cost per ton for the biomass for that facility, I think, started at $35, and now it's up to $44. So it's increased almost 30% per ton over that 5-year period. The escalator that is included in the pro forma is a 2% escalator for biomass. So I'm wondering if biomass becomes a more important fuel source, will there be, more of a demand issue? And then the issue also with the $40 per ton. Now, I think that was estimated back 6 months or so ago when the fuel prices, diesel, gasoline, maybe was in the $2.70 range. And I'm wondering how those pieces fit together in terms of projecting the cost of that fuel source into the future.
Mr. Chairman, Regents, in looking at the cost of biomass, and we look at a number of projects, what's true is that every region of the country, and particularly throughout the western United States, there are some variabilities. We actually draw from the market. We went out and talked to a number of suppliers and determined that, one, the volume was well under, in fact, a relatively small amount compared to the available resources. And the numbers that we got was a comfortable margin that the suppliers were comfortable with and willing to enter into multi-year agreements. In that, we had predictable algorithms for escalation, such as the cost of diesel for transportation, et cetera. So currently, we're still comfortable and have validated that repeatedly into the market. Now, it's true, no contracts are yet signed. And it would not be wise to do so until a project is in place. And at that time, the final multi-year contracts will be secured. But the University of Montana has one very unique and we think important asset that is not common to other forest universities, and that is the Blue Brick National Forest, which you are stewards of. That gives you, in effect, a sustainable base from which you can practice sustainable recovery of waste woody biomass. And in that sense, that provides an additional level of stability. But as Vice President Duringer noted, in that, to be even more conservative, a fund was set aside to level out those spikes in the market that can occur on a year-to-year basis. So a lot of thought has gone into that. We do a number of these projects, and we're extremely sensitive to the cost and supply of biomass and have embedded in this a lot of conservative points. But as far as the cost today, we've gone back to those suppliers, and that cost we are still comfortable with. And in that sense, we look to the market and the suppliers and the people that will be entering into multi-year contracts to supply that. If that does change, that would be something that the university would look at.
Angela Farr is fidgeting in her seat. She wants to say something.
Thank you. I just wanted to add a couple of points to David's comments because of my direct familiarity with the U of M Western system as well, and what's happened with the pricing there and some differences between that system and the system that we're going to be looking at for the U of M. I guess the price of woody biomass fuel is directly related to fuel quality, and what we've encountered in my experience, which I managed the Fuels for Schools program for the state of Montana from 2005 through 2010, is that when we took industrial scale biomass systems that were very proven in the wood products industry at a large scale and scaled those down to smaller Fuels for Schools types of applications, we found some challenges and we had to work through those challenges, and particularly with respect to fuel quality. Smaller equipment is not as forgiving. The system at Western is about 1/7 the size of the system that will go in at U of M, should you approve this project. And in kind, the industrial scale of the fuel delivery equipment, the conveyance equipment that takes the fuel from the storage area into the boiler itself, will be much more robust. There will be a screening system that will divert oversized pieces so that they don't jam up the system. That's been one of the challenges at U of M Western. And they will have a hammer mill to reduce that fuel in size as well. And so the end result is their fuel specification and the fuel quality demanded by the system will be less than what is demanded by U of M Western today. And that has a direct impact on the price. The last point I'll make is that a little over a year ago, Smurfit Stone Container closed down. They were using about 10 times as much hog fuel as U of M would use should they put the system in, just for the heat and power portion of Smurfit Stone's operation. And their pricing was anywhere from $21 to $32 a bone dry ton, according to Beth Dodson, professor in the College of Forestry and Conservation at U of M. So I think personally that the price is very reasonable. It's based on the market, as David said, and the market has basically fallen out in Missoula for that kind of material because of Smurfit's closure. Thank you.
Jeff, will you talk to the air quality, please?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm Jeff Chafee with Bison Engineering. Been working on the air quality permit application for the university. A couple parts to the question on the emissions side. First, the standard that we set out to meet in the air quality permitting process is primarily the ambient air quality standards in the Missoula area. And through the permit application, which is which is being worked on by the county, excuse me, by the county agency currently, that's what we believe that we have shown, is that with this project we can meet all of the available or all of the current ambient air quality standards in the Missoula Valley. So that's really the standard that needs to be met. In terms of the comparison to natural gas, it's really a fairly complex comparison. As you heard earlier in the presentation, on the carbon side, there's some major advantages to biomass over natural gas. On the air quality side, it's really a comparison of various numbers. And I guess I would point back to the permitting process and compliance with the standards as the primary issue here, as adverse to trying to say it's 40% more or 40% less. We do believe, as you heard, that the conversion of the biomass to a syngas will make the overall combustion process more like natural gas, and that the actual emissions will be fairly close to natural gas in the end analysis. Some may be slightly positive, some may be slightly negative as compared to natural gas, but fairly close in the end analysis. Because we've permitted on a more cautious basis, the numbers you see in some of the newspaper articles and some of the differences that you've seen quoted aren't really necessarily what's going to happen in actual emissions after the project starts up. Be happy to answer any further questions.
Okay, thanks, Jeff. Additional questions?
Regent Bornpool.
I've heard a lot of discussion about the air quality, but what I haven't heard as much discussion about is water quality and what kind of water usage will go into this plant and what that means as far as the environmental impact.
Tom, I think you could probably answer that the best.
Board of Regents. I'm Tom Javins, the Associate Director for Engineering and Utilities. We estimate the water usage for this plant for the process purposes, which is primarily blowdown, to be about 130,000 gallons per year. The Missoula Sewage Treatment Plant, where this water will go to, has a maximum capacity of about 10.5 million gallons per year, or excuse me, gallons per day. And they average between 6 and 9 million gallons. So at this point, it's not a large increase in water. All of our water from the plant will be going directly to the sewer system. None will be released to surface water.
Regent Robinson?
Mr. Chair, thank you. I have a question related to, it certainly sounds like it was explained very well by President Engstrom about the why this is so important, and there certainly has been a lot of work to justify why. My question is more to the how it's put together, and I'm not sure who might answer the question, but it's also been brought to our attention that the project cost is about 16 million. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that it's basically a turnkey type project where the team has been assembled in order to develop the project and to put it into operations.
That's
and
correct.
turn it over to the university. My question is related to how that contract was developed, or what stage it's at right now, because is this something that it seems like we'd want to have bid out in order to consider who would be interested in this project? I understand that those that have helped to develop it to this point would certainly have a kind of an inside track to the project itself, but is that something that's been considered?
Okay, let me start off with the first part of your question. Get the image of a funnel in your head. For the last year and a half, we were trying to figure out what equipment, what cost, what parameters, where, how much, all these different things. And so this rhetoric you've seen in the paper about going from 10 to 13 to $16 million, that was our journey to figure out what we were going to do, because we knew that we had to meet these ultra-high standards of emission controls. And so the product that we're talking about now is substantially more controlled than our initial investigation. And that should not be any surprise to anybody who's been involved with projects before. So where we are with the 16 million guaranteed maximum price, it's a guaranteed maximum price. We anticipate, and the way this thing is structured, although we haven't entered into no contract yet because we can't do that without your approval, is that we will have a substantial underage on the cost of the project. 400,000 or 500,000, maybe $1 million, something like that, as we go through it. As to the competitive bid, it wasn't until 2 sessions ago that performance contracting was written into the Montana Code. And performance contracting is handled very similarly to how you select architects. And so we started off with a large number of people who were interested in this project. We narrowed that down, and we interviewed 3. And so you interview them not so much on their price, because you don't know what the price is yet. You know, it's a concept. You interview them based on their skill sets, their track record, their guarantees, their, all the different kind of intangibles, because you know that they're going to be able to deliver, because that's what they do. And so when we selected McKinstry, we selected them over 2 other different suppliers. And by law, that was sufficient to meet performance contracting requirements. Now, in the case of Nextera, we started off with 11 different technology providers. Then we went down to 8, then we went down to 3, and we had a competitive interview for the 3. So there's been strong elements of competition in this process, but because it is so, I mean, this is not like building a dormitory. This is much more engineering-wise complex and interdependent with itself. And so that's how we approach this, staying strictly within the confines of the performance contracting requirements as written in law.
Regent Borpel.
I have 2 questions, if you don't mind. The questions themselves are unrelated. So I have a better understanding now of where the water's going and how it's able to be disposed of and treated within Missoula. But is there an increase of water usage from the current plant to what it's going to become? And what is the impact there?
The boiler is going to replace part of the natural gas that is currently used to heat the campus. So the overall water use to make steam and distribute it around campus to our buildings is going to remain the same. as it is currently. There should be no difference there. The only water that I haven't accounted for is associated with the classroom that is included with it.
Thank you. And then my second question is, how were students involved in the development of this process and where they stand now? Because there is no student on your panel.
We have a sustainable campus committee on our campus. It's composed of faculty, staff, and students. Then we have a number of different people in environmental sciences and in the College of Forestry. We have been talking at various levels with the faculty, staff, and students from all over the campus as we've moved this forward. And if you'd like, I've got a letter from the Sustainable Campus Committee, who is a very, very tough sell that endorses this project, as well as I've got another handful of letters from diverse groups such as the Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation and other different conservation groups who are very positive for this. And so we involve students to the extent that you can when you're taking an engineering concept and trying to breathe life into it. So we certainly talk to them, and we've gotten their endorsement from the Sustainable Campus Committee. But it's very technical. I mean, I've got PhD engineers that are trying to figure this out. So to take an undergraduate student and say, well, what do you really think about that precipitator? It's a pretty problematic question.
Mr. Chair, one last question, and that kind of relates to the question that we just heard here. How, if this moves forward today, what is the proposed method of including participation with the community to comment on it as it moves forward? And with that, in particular, well, that's basically my question.
Okay. As required by law, right now the air quality permit is out for public comment. The environmental analysis, which was published today on our website, is out for public comment 30 days. 30 days. So at the end of those 2 comment periods, we will take whatever comments that we get, analyze them, address them in one way or the other, as in this is not applicable, or you got a point there and we'll do this. So we will have those 2 public comment opportunities that'll be done in the next month or so. Yes, please.
The public has had about 9, or will have about 9 opportunities to offer comment. In addition to the ones that Bob just addressed, we also will get a Title V air quality permit from DEQ, and that has public comment periods with it as well.
And as you may remember, we had, in November of last year, we had a questions session where we hosted a poster session at the University Center where we had over 100 people show up and ask us questions. We answered the questions, and then in February we had an answers session where we answered all the questions. So as Tom said, we've been in front of the public numerous times on this.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan. Vice President Derringer, the repairs to the current system that have been talked about, I think it was 500,000. Is that included in the 16 million, or is that a separate project?
That is a separate project. What we intend to do is, this is kind of a crude word, but we're going to replumb boilers number 2 and 3 into the stack of the biomass plant, because the biomass plant will have a 100-foot stack, and all of this is about dispersion. It's not about what's coming out of the stack, it's about dispersing what comes out of it, not the gases themselves. And so we don't have, $500,000 is just a wag at this point. Okay. We think it'll come in at that or less, but it's a plumbing problem.
And then I was looking for it earlier and I can't find it, but in the documentation there was a discussion about your ability to bill other entities for the use of this heating system, and it reminded me of something that my children have told me frequently about U of M, and take no offense in this, but nickel and diming students. So I'm wondering, as you rebuild this, how that affects students and departments on campus.
The recharge method we are going to use is exactly the same recharge method that MSU has. So we are not going to be charging students. We're going to just be moving, from a cost accounting perspective around, moving the charges for the steam that they currently pay for. It's just an accounting adjustment. But MSU's been doing it for decades.
Regent McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Derringer, and all of you folks for being here to answer our questions and to bring forth the great information and insight that you have today. And Mr. Derringer, the other day on the phone, you and I were discussing the extended warranty from Nextera and the 1 year full labor, the 2 additional years of materials, et cetera. What will the costs be to the University of Montana beyond that per year? What would that look like to make sure that we keep the investment running at full capacity?
The line item in the contract you're referring to is what's known as measurement and validation. And so that is roughly $150,000 per year that is built into the pro forma. And so and it's not uncommon, correct me if I'm wrong, as these things stabilize and you get some characteristic performance out of them over a few years, a lot of people drop that M&V altogether because they know how it's going to work. So it's really like an insurance policy as you start the thing up. And you can keep it in place 1 year or 20 years, whatever you choose. But I want to make the point, it is already included in our pro forma.
Chairman Buchanan, I'm curious what Chancellor Story has to say about his boiler. I realize it's not the same, but you're operating a similar unit day in and day out. Challenges, concerns, endorsements?
Regent Christen, yes, I'm happy to answer that. We have had some concerns with our system. It was a pilot system of that size. It does go, as Angela said, to the quality of the fuel. We've got that worked out. It's working. Our system is much, much smaller. And quite honestly, I think UM has done a whole lot of research and learned from some of the things that we wish we had thought about at the beginning. So we completely endorse this. The reasons that President Engstrom said make sense. We're glad we did it. We'd do it again.
I'm certain you made similar studies and how it would impact and how the fees would be and the costs and what would offset. How far have you been from accurate on that?
Well, I'm going to turn to Vice Chancellor Briggs for the absolute numbers, but I think we've saved the state about $100,000 a year in fuel costs.
Regent Robinson.
The mention of the pro forma, and it may relate to some of the information that we've received, is when you calculated the operations and maintenance once it's online, do you see that there's an increase in staff in order to operate it or a decrease in that?
I'll turn that over to Rosie and Tom. Rosie, why don't you talk about the money first?
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, I have to apologize. Tim Tolman was trying to get my attention when you were asking the question, so I have to apologize. Could you repeat that? I've been paying attention the whole time until now. Wouldn't you know it? I apologize.
All right, stop passing notes to one another there.
Okay.
My question is in respects to the pro forma and looking
Correct.
at your estimated operations and maintenance costs. And in particular, I'm curious, do you see that there's going to be an increase in the staff that you need to operate it or a decrease in that staff?
Thank you, and I did hear the question this time. There actually is, if you look at the pro forma, there actually is built into this an additional position for this, and it's under the line labor. In talking with Tom and his folks and other individuals that operate these kinds of facilities, it will require an additional staff, and we have built that along with the benefits into the pro forma.
I would add, when we went up to Victoria to take a look at some of John's plants, you walk into the control room and it's kind of like going into NASA. I mean, the amount of labor that's involved is significantly less because it's all computer controlled. But there is labor, and we are going to have to add one. But, you know, in the great scheme of things, we may also reduce some labor on the other side. So that, we'll face that problem when we come to it, but we've got it built in.
I have one question. You've referred an application for one more air permit, quality permit. Is this approval for authority to move forward contingent upon that?
Yes.
Were there two that I heard you mention?
Yeah, this has been very torturous for us trying to get all this lined up and sequenced together. The two things that we needed to get done are we needed to have Ben issue an air quality permit. We're in the public comment phase of that, and we're relatively confident, well, we're very confident that that will be issued to us. So that's the first one. The second is to respond to the economic or the environmental analysis. So there's two regulatory pieces that we have to pass through before we would do anything. I think you saw in my editorial in the paper a couple weeks ago, you know, we're not going to dig a shovel of dirt or pour a pound of concrete until I got these things done. That's the bottom line.
Thank you. I don't know how important it is to this board, but there's no mention of contingency related to those permits in the item for notice.
Oh. One last comment from McKinstry, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Regents, I would like to bring up one more thing that was brought up at our informational meeting that I want to clarify. At the informational meeting in March, Regent Barrett, you asked, McKinstry, you know, you're a strong company, you're a good company, but just like General Motors, what happens if you go out of business or you have bankruptcy? I am here to tell you that should that happen, we have found an insurance policy that we can put against the savings for the 20 years to guarantee that you get your savings if I'm somewhere begging for food. So I thought I'd let you know that. Thank you. Well, I appreciate that.
Great. Deputy Commissioner Robinson.
Chairman Buchanan, your question regarding contingency was one question I was going to ask Bob to talk about in terms of making sure that we clarify what is being asked for here. The language indicates that the University of Montana will enter into a performance contract with McKinstry and then come back in September for authorization for issuing bonds. Now, the contingencies, I know that we've talked about the permitting. I mean, nothing will go forward, obviously, until the permitting takes place. But would you enter into the contract prior to making sure that you can issue the bonds or that the bonds are issued? Do you have to enter into the contract first, or is there contingency language in the contract that protects that if some of these key elements that I think you've put in place, and one of those obviously is the bond issuance to finance the project. If those do not move forward, are we locked into the performance contract, or is there language in the contract that protects the university system?
Okay, let me give you the sequence of events that I'm going to ask Rosie to talk about the bonds a little bit. The first thing that's going to happen after you approve this, we will go and get the air quality permit and the environmental analysis, and that'll be behind us. We will then enter into probably a fairly lengthy period of time with McKinstry to develop a performance contract, because performance contracts are relatively complex. So we will hire, I'm sure, a third party to help us administer that contract, to get it in shape. We will enter into that because we will not have any trouble selling bonds. You know, our credit rating is AA. We have sold bonds, refunded bonds. We've done a million things with bonds over the past 20 years, and we've never had even a burp of getting those things issued. So Rosie, would you talk about the QECBs for a minute?
There's two pieces to the financing as it relates to bonds. There are regular bonds that we issue, revenue bonds that will be issued, non-tax or tax-exempt bonds, and then there are what we are hoping there will be QECBs, which are qualified energy conservation bonds. Those bonds are subsidized by the federal government in terms of the interest. There was an allocation made to the state of Montana of those bonds for which we had to submit an application. In that application, two things had to occur. First, the bond counsel, our bond counsel, had to verify that they believed there would be no problem with these bonds selling. Secondly, We also had to have underwrite, or a bond counsel had to actually look at the project and say, based on all the information they had at that time, because we're not at the very end, that these do in fact qualify. So we are waiting to hear from the state. I know that they were putting that on hold until after the session. We're anxious to hear from there, but we've submitted our application and it is in. When we get the QECBs, that will really drive when we can issue debt and come to you, because we wouldn't be comfortable coming to the board until we knew whether or not that we were in fact going to be able to get QECBs. I would like to acknowledge the governor's office, though, the Department of Administration, and Dorsey Whitney, because these are the first QECBs that will be issued by Montana, even though they've been issued in other states. It took a lot to learn about how these actually work, and they were very instrumental in helping us get that application. So once, I really think that would have to fall first, then we would be able to come to the board and say, we're ready to issue the debt, depending on when we need to do the drawdowns on the cash.
Mr. Chairman, just quickly, we're waiting for regential approval before we approve the issuance of the QECBs, because what we don't want to have is a situation where we issue the QECBs, the regents disapprove the project, and that now we have to go back and do an entire re-advertisement and reallocation of the QECBs. So in order for them to wait on us, we have to wait on you.
I don't think the question was answered, however. Right, are you anticipating signing a contract? And if you are, is there language in there in the event that the financing is not approved by this board that we're able to back out of it?
We will sign no contract by any means until this board approves it.
Approves the financing?
Approves.
That was the question. The question was...
No, we'll sign the contract. I mean, I've come to you folks a dozen times to ask for bonds to be sold. And I think the financials, the coverage ratios, everything you'll see coming from us would be like any other project we've brought over the past 20 years. So I think we would enter into the contract with McKinstry so that we can start things, the engineering and so forth, the design of the plant to be progressing, but we won't need the money for the bonds until the fall. And so I think that's how it would normally progress.
Is that a satisfactory answer for you, Mick?
Could I clarify? And maybe I could help this. I think that the difficulty is we want to issue, we want to be able to have authority to issue debt when it's most appropriate for the debt to be issued, if in fact we get are awarded some of the QECBs. What we don't want to do is issue debt prior to the need for cash, because then we're going to start to accrue interest. So I think what we're really hoping is that neither the project nor the bonds would go forward without your approval.
That's true.
Am I correct in that? And so it may very well be that you approve the project, and at the same time, if we have everything together, you would approve the bonds, but it may be that you approve the project, and it'll take us a while before we can get the bonds moving. But we would still ask for approval to proceed with the bonds.
I appreciate that. The question is still on the table, is will there be a contract signed with you that in the event, for some reason, the financing were not approved this fall, that we would be able to back out from any expense that's owed or any contract that we would sign?
Mr. Chairman and Regents, we sign all of our contracts contingent upon the financing and the air quality. We have no interest in McKinstry at moving forward and doing things until, in fact, you have the financing in place and moving forward, so we're fine with that. Thank you.
Regent Bornpool.
We've been showed some incredible case studies of what a plant like this can accomplish. Have there been any has there been any research done as far as searching for grants or any other funding, or are we simply looking at bonds?
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, yes, in fact, we have already received a $180,000 grant from DNRC, and in fact, we have another application in for another $250,000 for this project as well, and we continue to look wherever possible. There's also a chance for another grant that we're looking at submitting, so we continue to try to find other sources of funds to fund this project. But at this point, we've already did receive $180,000 in grant funds.
Mr. Rome?
Blue is good. Blue is good. Montana is part of what's called the Western Climate Initiative, which is as you may know, it is a collaborative of states, including California and Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, that are working to collaborate on carbon policy. And in British Columbia, we have a carbon tax, and we've got a carbon neutral government legislation. And as part of that, our government is procuring carbon credits. And this project has been put forward to our cabinet as something to consider, procuring and paying for the carbon credits that would arise from the implementation of this project. So that's a possibility, so that you could consider that another form of grant if that goes ahead. And that would be a pilot project between the state of Montana and the province of British Columbia. But that'll be an option for the management of Montana to consider.
To the highest price, I would add.
Only the best.
Regent Robinson.
Regarding finances, I'm just curious, do you know, have you investigated the new market tax credits and if that would apply to this particular project?
We've previously looked at new market tax credits, and the study that we did of them then was not what we wanted to get into. The QECBs are by far better than new market tax credits. And so that's the way we're going to go.
Chairman Buchanan, I guess as a committee member, I think some of the questions we're asking is starting to move into what likely will come later in terms of how we pay for that. I think your question earlier about it being conditional or contingent upon air quality, a lot of what has been raised in terms of questions of late is how it impacts air quality and some of what we're seeing in the paper and that I think has caused us all some pause. I think the DEQ will do their job, and some of those things will be answered as the thing moves along, and if it fails to be answered, that in itself will answer some of our concerns and I think bring the project to a halt. And so I guess as a committee member, I'm prepared to move this forward.
I concur with that assessment. Angela? Yes. Any final comments or questions on this? To all of you who participated in this, thank you so much for your diligent preparation and ability to answer all these questions.
Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you. Moving on to item B, authorization for planning of student success athletic departments, facilities master plans, also at Missoula. President Engstrom.
Vice President Durringer, are you going to present this item as well? Okay.
If I might interrupt for 1 second, Mr. Durringer, is there any public comment related to that previous issue? If there is, please come to the podium, introduce yourself, and share with us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is John Snively. I'm a longtime resident of Missoula, retired dentist, and I thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I became interested in this project after attending the second Biomass meeting poster session that the university had hosted, and I sensed at that time that the entire story about it was not being told. My greatest concern in Missoula, of course, is air quality. Having lived there for 33 years, I appreciate how far we have come in regard to our air quality. We have put restrictions on residential wood burning, limited street sanding in the winter, and expanded our bus services, all to reduce air pollution and at great cost. Now we are being told that we're going to be adding a biomass burner, for better or worse, but it clearly will produce more emissions than the current gas burner at the university. It is evident in the application for the biomass or for the boiler permit that there will be greater emissions, both of PM 2.5, CO, and NOx emissions, even with abatement. They'll at least be twice as high, almost twice as high, according to the permit, than the current boiler, as predicted by the McKinstry study. This might not seem like much from a point source where there's good ventilation, but in our valley, which is a well, which is tends to have stagnant air, this raises great concerns to me personally, where I live. In addition to the regulated pollutants, we're talking an additional 10 to 15,000 tons of water a year that will be hanging over our heads, especially during times of stagnation, and that will tend to alter the microclimate in that area. And we've seen that at the Frenchtown Mill, and we've seen it at the old particle board plant in the western part of town. I feel we should also be concerned when the final paragraph of one of the biomass project narratives signed by a number of professors at the university says, Missoula's Valley's constrained topography presents ideal research conditions for long-term analysis of environmental impacts of efficient woody biomass boiler combustion. This type of comment appears more than once in documents from the university indicating an intent to use this as an experiment for a similar project in other communities. Personally, I don't like the idea of somebody experimenting on my air. Others have called into question the finances of this project and whether it will support itself. I have some reservations about that. I've heard what was said just a minute ago, and that my concerns may be not as, in the end, validated if this project moves forward. I guess my concern is after spending $16+ million on this project, we have still got to look back on the thousands of dollars we've spent in Missoula for abatement of current and previous air conditions in Missoula, and that a number of prestigious journals and the American Lung Association have advocated against projects like this in the past and currently, and that many esteemed scientists even would call into question the immediate carbon neutrality of this project. As a dentist, I learned early on to inform my patients of many different possibilities and alternatives for treatment that they might pursue, including doing nothing. And now I urge you to shelve this idea until all viable alternatives have been explored, including doing nothing but to upgrade the current boiler system. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Snively.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the Board of Regents. My name is Jan Hoem. I'm speaking for a group of senior citizens. They're UM alumni, professors emeritus, and other retired people. I sent a letter to Chairman Christian and Commissioner Stearns on May 10th, and I have additional copies if any of you would like to see it. We are pleased that the University of Montana is trying to reduce its carbon footprint through its greenhouse gas reduction strategies. As our letter states, we have concerns that the biomass gasification plant may not be the best choice for providing heat for the UM's buildings. I will talk about two issues. One, emissions as they relate to the EPA and health, and two, considerations of other options. The city of Missoula has been designated an air stagnation zone. Our setting often causes the air to stagnate during winter months. The cold air holds emissions from wood stoves, automobiles, heaters, industry, etc., down close to the valley floor. And over time, the quality of the air deteriorates. If it becomes too bad, alerts are announced, and various activities must be curtailed or restricted. Separate from the EPA, the American Lung Association recently gave Missoula's air quality a rating. It's moved up from an F to a D prior to the closing of Smurfit-Stone, so it may be a little bit better now. This is after a great deal of effort by the Health Department, the Air Quality Advisory Council, of which I'm a member, and a lot of creative transportation measures. The Environmental Protection Agency has authority over us. It requires our air to contain fewer than a certain measure of very small particles called PM 2.5. Because these particulates are so small, they can go deeper into the lungs where they can't be expelled. This can cause serious lung problems, especially for the very young, the elderly, whose protective systems are not fully operational, as well as people with asthma and the infirm. The EPA has warned us that Missoula is extremely near to not meeting the EPA's standard. If our air were to exceed the particulate standard over a period of time, we would be found non-compliant. The public would incur large expenses, probably in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, for research, studies, and remediation, and the control of this would be taken out of our hands. It should be noted that the EPA will probably make its PM 2.5 standards more restrictive over the next few years. The permitting application is currently with Ben Schmidt and the Missoula Health Board. The permitting process makes special allowances for higher particulate numbers from a biomass gasification plant than it allows for a natural gas plant, which we are currently using. When the EPA measures the particulates in a community, the EPA makes no such allowances, and neither do the lungs of the vulnerable. Compared to our current natural gas burners, the biomass gasification plant will produce up to 2 times the carbon dioxide and nitrous oxides, and in some cases, release 3 times the particulate matter. In addition, the steam releases in winter can only exacerbate our inversion times. The bottom line for us is, in terms of emissions, why would we spend more money with the result of making the quality of our air worse? The second question that we ask is, will the biogasification plant give us the best use of our public monies? And we don't know the answer. Mentioned in our letter, usually institutions first address the building envelopes, making them the most energy efficient buildings they can, so that they can best measure the size to build the new energy installation. Efficiency measures produce the biggest and easiest paybacks in making buildings more efficient, and we know the UM has been working on such efforts, but more remains. How was the biomass gasification plant sized? Someone here I know can answer that. As we look at what has been done, we see only the biomass plant that has been studied in depth. Has there been a pro forma study of other alternatives, such as the ground source heat pumps? A small unit exists on the South Campus. The University of Montana sits on top of a very large, fast-moving aquifer. Mentioned as a possible source for cooling in the executive summary order under sustainability, this aquifer can also produce heat and with no emissions. The electricity to the pump which takes very little energy, could be provided by an array of solar panels. Amortized over 20 years, would this be more or less costly in dollars than the biomass plant? We don't know because we haven't seen a pro forma. Your decision on how to heat the University of Montana campus is extremely important, and it need not be rushed. We ask that you postpone this decision in order to carefully consider the biomass gasification plant in the context of Missoula's special circumstances and consider other options to be certain that you are making the best choice. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other public comment related to this item? Thank you, you too. Dr. Derringer, I think we're back to you for the next item.
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Buchanan?
Yes, please.
In the interest of time, and we have a number of other action items, I'm wondering if I could provide a little overview of each item and then allow the regents to provide or ask questions of the campus officials. I think we might be able to move through the items a little more quickly that way.
That would be great.
So in item B, most of these additional items have been brought to the board before, more or less as information items. So I think you're probably familiar with a large share of them. The Student Success Athletic Department facilities has been an information item before, and the idea is that there needs to be perhaps some upgrading renovation for locker rooms, weight facility. It would be part of the Adams Center. It would require a movement of art annex that's part of the Adams Center right now with perhaps a new construction of that facility in some other location on campus that has been, I think there's some ideas in terms of where that would be, a couple different locations. It's planning money for $400,000 that would be paid for out of basically donations at this point, is my understanding, although it does also include revenue from athletic ticket sales. The plan will be brought back to the board when it's completed for approval. And there are some issues in terms of there may have to be some financing connected with it, and I've had some discussions with Vice President Derringer and President Engstrom regarding the art annex as an educational facility, academic facility, coupled with a project that might have a lot of athletic proposals. So we'll, as that moves forward with the plan, I think we have to certainly look at that in terms of how that fits together. So, Mr. Chairman.
Any questions or comments related to this item from members of the board? Anything that you're dying to share with us, President Engstrom or Dr. Derringer? Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan. I'm kind of confused because there's multiple projects that deal with construction, but do you anticipate, even though the planning money is coming from private donations, that the construction and completion of this project will result in an increase in student fees?
Regent Hamilton, no. The athletic fee that is on our fee proposal has nothing to do with this construction project.
Great, thank you very much. Deputy Commissioner Robinson, proceed. Item C.
Mr. Chairman, item C, I'm assuming that we could probably take public comment on all of these additional items at the conclusion of the review of the items instead of doing those individually. Item C is again a proposal that has been brought forward to the board as an information item back in November. It deals with auxiliary activities on the MSU Bozeman campus. Part of the project, and again, this is money for planning and design that will be paid out of auxiliary revenues. Part of the project identifies a lot of deferred maintenance activities or projects for dorms and auxiliary buildings on the campus. There's also a proposal to look at an additional new dorm facility that would house some additional students in a suite type of setup. Again, planning money, design money. There is a potential bond issue connected with this in terms of financing. And again, as the planning design would be completed, a project plan would come back to the board at a future date, coupled with a financing plan to move that forward. Mr. Chairman.
Questions or comments from members of the board? Thank you for the overview, Deputy Commissioner Robinson. Item D.
Member of the board, item D is an expansion of the stadium lease. I think all of us remember the expansion of the football stadium, the end zone area. With that expansion, that does impact the track facility at MSU Bozeman. This particular proposal is to request authority for the expenditure of $550,000 of private donations that is already in hand to deal with some of the impact of that stadium in terms of location of track seating and also a storage facility and some other ancillary activities, site work that may be necessitated for that particular program. Again, private donations and that money, I believe, is in hand at this point.
Questions? Great. Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Robinson. Proceed.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I'm going to try to group the next three items, E, F, and G, into one discussion. These projects come from MSU Billings. They are projects that are really part of their master planning activity, and Chancellor Groth did present this information, I think, in the March meeting in terms of the master planning. The renovation of the Student Union building, $1.2 million, to address really a sort of a student success area that would be utilized for student computer labs, study areas, et cetera. It would utilize the major ballroom that is presently within the Student Union building, that as they look at the activity level that they anticipate from the use of the student success operation versus the ballroom activity, it would be utilized much more fully on a day-to-day basis. I think the biggest question I have regarding this particular project is, where will we have the next board meeting that's held in Billings, because it was normally held in that ballroom. So an alternate location, yeah, it is a major concern. The gymnasium, item F, is a smaller project that includes lighting and a replacement of seating within the gymnasium. The gymnasium is a facility that has been treated for financial purposes and budgeting purposes as 60% state funding, 40% funding from other revenues, auxiliary revenues, in terms of athletic activity. So this particular proposal is requesting the authority to expend student fees for the 40% of the project. The 60% of the project that is funded with state dollars is included in the current operating budget. So it's already been budgeted and approved by the board as part of the current operating budget for this particular year. The bookstore renovation, again, blends very well with the student union renovation. And again, part of the master planning in terms of student use and trafficking of activity through the bookstore. This will be financed basically with bookstore revenues is the anticipation. And you'll notice on the item there is a projection of the net revenue from the bookstore operations for the next 3 years. That certainly indicates that the $60,000+ in intercap loan financing per year that would be required as a result of this will be paid for out of net bookstore revenue. So a certain amount of cash, $700,000 total project, $120,000 paid for out of present auxiliary revenues, the rest of it financed with an intercap loan, and the financing, the repayment requirement, the bookstore revenues, net bookstore revenues would be sufficient to make that payment. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes those 3 items.
Any questions or comments from members of the board? Mr. Regent Barrett.
Yeah, I have a question. It relates, it's really the same question. It relates to items E and G. That is, I look at them and in round numbers, in item E, you have a construction cost of $920,000 and A&E costs of $180,000. And on G, you have construction costs of $415,000 and A&E costs of $100,000. In other words, they're essentially between 20 and 25% of construction costs for A&E costs. That seems disproportionate in my experience. And I'd like to understand why it is in these instances.
Well, I think on the first item, on item E, it's about 15%, and I think that's reasonably standard with buildings that we ask A&E to manage for us.
Well, 180 to 920 is more like 18.5 or something like that.
Right, but it's 180 to 1.2 million, so it's 15% of the total cost.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
a semantic difference. I was
Yeah.
referring to construction costs because the total includes the A&E costs, so you're
Yeah.
kind of bootstrapping there.
And Regent Barrett, I'm afraid I can't answer the propriety of those. Maybe Terry can.
I don't need, and I'm not even saying that. I'm saying they seem out of whack in my experience. I don't know that I have the relevant experience, but it's jumped out at me as a large relative percentage, and I was curious.
Thank you. I'll have some discussions and a visit. I can answer that tomorrow.
Thank you, sir.
Tomorrow's meeting.
Regent Hamilton.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan. Chancellor Grossath, I was struck by the projected increases in bookstore revenues from 11 to 14. Can you kind of give me why you're predicting that? I mean, do you anticipate more bookstore services or more book sales or more students, or talk to me about that a little, please.
We have currently have just concluded running a bookstore operation downtown, in downtown Billings, which we are closing and have been losing a significant amount of money on that project. And so our net revenues will increase as a result of closing that operation.
Thank you, Dr. Grossath. Deputy Commissioner Robinson.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the next item deals with planning money for a new residence hall at Montana Tech. $150,000 is the authority that they are looking for. Again, this particular proposal was presented back in November, and one of the connections that we have with this particular proposal is to perhaps combine a bond financing for this dorm if it would move forward with the bond financing for the biomass steam boiler. There is certainly an attachment connected that demonstrates, I think, the need in terms of an additional dorm on that particular campus regarding the applications for housing versus available spaces that are there. The growth in terms of number of students that we've seen on that campus for the last 2 or 3 years certainly is driving that particular need. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I have no other comments on that item.
Any questions, members of the board? Seeing none, move forward there.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, the last item, again, this particular item was brought forward in November as an information piece, an available piece of property adjacent to the UM Western campus. They're able to acquire that property for, I think, a very good price, $210,000. This has been a piece of property that they have been interested in for a number of years. I think the price has now been negotiated or dropped to a level that is very reasonable. And so they're bringing this forward as really a cash purchase where they would use a combination of auxiliary funds and plant funds to acquire this piece of property.
Questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you, Deputy Commissioner Robinson, for your swift and comprehensive summation of the remaining action items. Any public comment or comments from members of the audience related to any of the items that we've been discussing? Perhaps, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, we are reaching the end of our allotted time for this item. We have 3 more information items. Maybe try to wrap these up. Sheila, you think we can get these done in 15, 20 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, information items A and B are just there for your information, so that is all that I will say about those. And I would encourage you to review those lists of project authorities that are connected with our campuses. Item C. 2 years ago, the board approved a pilot project referred to as the Grow Eastern Montana Tuition Pilot Program for Miles Community College. And the idea was to bring it back to the board for review at this particular point. President Hickswaw has some information that she will share. She has a PowerPoint, but I think in the interest of time, we will not go through the PowerPoint, but perhaps President Hickswaw, you could mention your interest in continuing that for another 2 years to make sure we have adequate information regarding the permanency of moving that forward.
In the interest of time, I'd like to express my interest in continuing it. To give you just a little bit of information, we've essentially doubled our enrollment in the Grow Eastern Montana states, and for the benefit of the regents who are new since we have done this, it's a project where we offered out-of-district tuition rates to residents from Wyoming, South Dakota, North Dakota, and Saskatchewan. I would regard it as a moderate success because doubling our enrollment with our small numbers means going from 16 to 31 students in the time period. So the rationale for the original proposal still remains valid because it mitigates the declining demographics in eastern Montana. And unlike Barry's, where's Barry? Is he back here behind me? Unlike Barry's trailer park, we still have capacity for additional students. And then it also increases, it shifts our recruiting area. Instead of coming 500 miles to the west to recruit in Montana, we are recruiting with Miles City as the center. So Beach, North Dakota is closer to us than Billings is. And as you saw earlier this morning, MCC is not part of the state's enrollment growth. In fact, we have declined 10.6% over the last 10 years. And so Grow Eastern Montana helps offset these losses. And so I would propose that you continue the pilot for 2 more years. We don't have enough data yet. The first year was approved after the recruiting time period, and so that data, it was too late. So that first year we don't have enough information. And then last year was impacted by the banner implementation. So if I could have 2 more years, that would give me 3 years of good data to base it on to see if it's continues to be successful and meets the goals. So thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie. A quick question, Deputy Commissioner Robinson. I noticed that for discussion, it's slated for tomorrow or 3 more action items. So anticipation would be to open up the meeting tomorrow and go through the action items that we just reviewed and then move into those. Or what is the end? Why are they separated?
Well, Mr. Chairman, the issue is one of time.
Okay.
Obviously, we are trying to move forward with the tuition discussion tomorrow, tuition and fees, and those two action items did have a close relationship to the tuition and fees discussion, so try to group those together and recognize probably did not have the opportunity today to have enough time to do total justice to the discussion of tuition and fees with all these other action items.
I appreciate that. Any comments or thoughts from members of the committee and the board as a whole? Final opportunity for public comment related to any of the items that we discussed today. Is it the general sense of the board to move these action items forward for approval tomorrow? Great, we'll do so as a motion. Unless I'm missing something, I think that wraps up the Administrative Budget and Audit Oversight Committee for this afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Buchanan. Good job. We're real close to back on schedule. Close enough, I think we can spare a break if all would like that. And we'll try to get back here by about 10. All right, we're ready to get started here. Other than that, I don't know what we're doing. Okay, I think at this time we're ready to move on to the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee.
The moment we've all been waiting for.
Chairman Barrett.
Consistent with my policy of causing no harm, I'll call on Deputy Commissioner Sylvia Moore.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, members of the board. We are grateful to Deputy Commissioner Robinson for trying to get us back on schedule, and we will try to keep that theme going. There are two items on the consent agenda, a minor policy revision and the level 2 items from the March submission. I would just say, just like others have said, that if there is anything that people want to pull off of that consent agenda, of course, that is the purview of the board. Otherwise, those go quickly.
True, and I'd like to point out, for those of you to look, particularly the Regents, that on the consent items are the level 2 items. And they will become action items for us next time, and we will have consented for them now. It's a very short list this time, much less than normal. But just a reminder, I don't have any problems with them, but just a reminder to always look at those, because they come up for action items and then we start having the debate when we've actually consented to them once before. It's not a process with which I'm still comfortable, but that's the process. So it's just a reminder to look at those before tomorrow's. So it'd be the sense of the board that we would move, or excuse me, the committee, Lynn? Excuse me, Regent Hamilton, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, sir. You know, I get confused when I glance at these agendas, because we have consent items that are approved by the Commissioner's office, and then we have consent items. Could we call this like submission items if they're coming up as something that we're going to actually take action on at the next meeting rather than consent items?
Regent Hamilton, I don't know why we can't get this one more intelligently discussed, but we seem to have problems with this. These were the ones that you had for information at the last meeting and are actually for action at this meeting, but this is the consent action agenda.
Yeah,
the
right.
information agenda is where you would see those otherwise.
I said that backwards.
It's okay.
Thanks for not pointing that out.
I tell you, it's this process. I was warned by the prior person in my position that it is probably the most confusing process on the face of the planet. And every time we try to make it better, I think I make it worse. So we still are going to look for better ways.
So I want to make sure I understand where the authority is here. If it comes up as a consent item, as a level 2 item, that means that we don't have any questions about those items, where we don't want to vote on them individually, and we are basically giving OCHI the authority to approve them. Is that correct?
Regent Hamilton, members of the board, yes, and Summer, if you wanted to, well, okay, when you get out of that, you want to click up the level 2. The level 2 items are items that require board approval. And you discussed these at that Monday meeting, and you know, we put them on the consent agenda, but if anybody wants to pull them off for further discussion, they can do that, but you're still voting on them. The level 1 items are the ones that we approve in our office. Thank you for asking. I think everybody needs that clarification. Yes, I'm sure it's clear as mud now. Thank you, sir. But at any rate, Summer has pulled up, and that's what's on the consent agenda. So 2 from Gallatin College Programs, which is new, and 1 from Montana State University Northern, and 1 from Missoula. Okay. That's Daniel Bingham.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, in our zeal to move forward our accreditation process, we neglected to bring our change in mission to the board. And so that's why this is before you here today. One thing I would like to point out in this new mission statement, there is a fairly big difference between our previous mission that was celebrating and acknowledged our roots as a technical college. This particular mission statement does that also. However, it boldly proclaims that we are a comprehensive tier college and the direction we have been going and moving towards. And so we thought it necessary, as we vetted it through our college council and through the institution as a whole, that we appropriately state that. That's what we're doing, that's what we are today, and that we embrace that wholeheartedly. And so we'd like to present this to the board for your approval.
Thank you. And it reads very well. Okay, is it sense of the committee that we move this forward for approval tomorrow? Thank you. Information items.
Our first information item will be presented by Deputy Commissioner Tyler Trevor. Oh, I just promoted you, Associate Commissioner Tyler Trevor. He's going to warn us, by the way, that normally he gets to do these things in the morning, and I asked him to wait until this committee. And so if he's a little bit more enthusiastic than usual, it's because he's tired of sitting.
Okay, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I have for you a presentation today that is a follow-on to the last board meeting in a couple of ways. We've been bringing forward to you dashboard indicators that is basically campus-level information that relates back to the strategic plan and individual measures. We have 2 categories of that today in terms of financial aid and affordability. Those are 2 sections within the access and affordability section of the strategic plan. Also, as a follow-on to the last board meeting, in April, I provided to you some tuition and fee comparison data to other states. So thus, the price portion of this presentation is somewhat of a review of that information, but critical to that information and critical to the decisions that you make with tuition cannot be done without information about trends in financial aid. I kind of see it as a 3-pronged stool. You have appropriations, tuition, and financial aid. Obviously, in Budget and Finance Committee, you're focused on appropriations, tuition revenue, and how that works towards the operation of an institution or the institutions. This presentation, rather, is from a student's point of view in terms of tuition, the price it takes, the price and the amount students and parents pay for college, the financial aid that they receive, and the various sources and types of financial aid, which all culminates into affordability.
I did really.
So what I've passed out to you is a 1-page, go ahead and move forward, Summer. A 1-page executive summary. It relates to each slide within this presentation. Oh, great. So this is for you to follow along with, and there's basically a bullet point for each slide. The main point that I'm trying to communicate with each one of these slides. I gave this presentation last week to the financial aid directors, a group that the first thing I said to them is, I'm more intimidated to give this presentation to you than the Board of Regents. These are the people that internalize these data. They work with them and they know them. And as far as information and data that I provided you, I've been more excited about being able to relay some of these trends to you than almost any other data that I put together. And the reason why is we have not, as a system, had our finger on the pulse of the connection of price, financial aid, and affordability for students. It's a very difficult task or set of data to corral. And I think with what I've provided here that it's a big step forward in terms of the availability of information as it directly relates to student financial aid and how it affects affordability. So with that said, I'll go through this presentation. I can't resist.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Yes,
interrupt
absolutely.
for just a moment? It's partly in honor of sort of the dashboard indicators that Regent Hamilton has long asked for, but especially relating to tuition. But also, we felt this one was timely because it gives a lot of context for the decisions you make tomorrow. I mean, sort of a big picture view of where we are in terms of tuition, cost, financial assistance, in other words, affordability. And I just think helps informs our discussion for tomorrow. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Commissioner. That was what I was trying to say in about 14 sentences. Summer, will you go ahead and move forward? Okay, so the first slide is generally just a review here. I'm going to need my own cheat sheet, though. Okay, so we look at the change in tuition and fees. We're always looking at tuition and fees here. And the other thing you need to know about this presentation, we're looking at one group set of students. It's the same set of students that you look at when you look at tuition. And that's first-time, full-time resident students. That's the tuition that we index when we take a look at what's the price of tuition and fees at UM or MSU and compare that to the Western states. So building on that, we kind of unfold various ways of looking at price and then financial aid. So this first slide, you can take a look at, it's 9 years of data. That's because that's the extent of our financial aid data, so I limited the price data to the same range. But you can see that at the doctoral level, MSU and U of M, the aggregate of their tuition and fees has increased about $2,000. And then we go on down the line there, our 4 years, $1,500. And at the 2-year has grown $700, an academic year for first-time, full-time resident students. Okay, next. This is a review of, if you remember at the last board meeting, we had 3 sheets, one for doctoral, one for 4-year, and one for 2-year. And so the first takeaway here is that MSU tuition and fees are less than the average of regional comparators at the doctoral level and at the 4-year level, but not at the 2-year level. So you've heard me say that before. That's a repeat. Now on the right-hand side of this screen is an analysis of the percent change 1 year back, and then 5 years back, and then 10 years back. So by looking at that, it's not out of this realm to say Montana has increased tuition fees at a slower or lower rate than any other state in the Western states, out of the Western states, over the last 10 years. So take a look at the 4-year category. I've highlighted all of those in gray are where we are first out of the Western states in terms of increasing tuition at the lowest rate or at the slowest rate. So out of all those years of the 4-year, 70%, 11%, 1%, we're the slowest. At the doctoral level, over the past year, and the yellow ones are highlighted to indicate where we're second to slowest. And there's 2 ways of saying that, second to last, so anyways, that's a little bit of fumbling of words there. But nevertheless, this is something that the board I know is proud of. It's part of our strategic plan, affordability through holding down tuition and fees, and we all know about the freeze that took place at our campuses over the last 4 years. Okay, next slide. With that said, and we've said this before, but it's worth mentioning again, this is again another review, tuition and fee levels in relation to median household income are above the regional average in Montana. We can't forget, when we're looking at tuition and fees, that median household income in Montana is, Brad Eldridge doesn't work for us anymore, unfortunately. Unfortunately, it's great that he works here now, but I would be turning to him to ask, where do we rank in the nation? I think we're like 46th in the nation in terms of median household income. Maybe we're 48th. Anyway, so going on to slide 4. You can't just look at tuition and fees, though. You have to look at the overall price of attendance when you're analyzing what it costs students and parents to pay for college. Price of attendance, or cost of attendance, again, now we're looking at academic year rates for the same cohort, first-time, full-time resident students, has grown, as you can see, from about 10,000 9 years ago to about 14,000 now. And now this is actually my own calculation of this. This includes tuition and fees, it includes room and board, and books and supplies. And I tell people, I have a junior in high school, and in a year I'm going to be paying this, so I'm acutely aware right now of what it's going to cost. I want to know. There's other calculations that are added in for cost of other things. I've taken those out because they vary so much between our campuses. I've kind of normalized this to things that are just educationally related. And this comes into play further down into the presentation, so that's why I'm kind of taking my time here to explain this. And the other point that I want to make about this first-time, full-time resident cohort is you think, well, there's a lot of other different types of students besides just first-time, full-time students and that are residents. Each fall, about 7,500 new students come to the university system. 4,800 of them this last fall were first-time, full-time resident students. So 2/3 of our new students are in this category. And that's important to realize when you start to see the impact of the financial aid portion of this and affordability. Okay, moving to the next slide. We get out of the review of price and we get into some of this interesting financial aid data. This first slide takes a look at the average amount of financial aid received by this cohort, the first-time, full-time resident students, of all the students, that 4,800. So you have 4,800 students come in fall 2010. What's the average amount of financial aid that they get? Not including loans. This includes scholarships, grants, waivers, and work study. The average student at the doctoral level got $3,800 of financial aid. I was pretty impressed by that. I would have guessed that it would have been less than that. And you can look back not in too recent times, it was a lot less than that. Look how it's escalated since about 2008. Average student and the amount of financial aid that they're getting. And you can see, though, and our 2-year campuses, not that far behind the 4-year.
Tyler, may we interrupt you for questions?
Absolutely.
So the financial aid includes subsidized loans or just?
No, financial aid is no loans.
Just financial?
This is financial aid in terms of scholarships, grants, waivers. This is nothing that you'll have to pay back. Okay, and now the next slide. What percent of the students are receiving financial aid? And what's the overall average amount here? This slide will show you. 73% of those 4,800 students were receiving some sort of financial aid for an average amount of $3,600 across the entire system. Okay, next slide. So we start to look into, so where are these funds coming from and what's the result of these increases? And the first thing you got to stop at are Pell Grants. We've known that Pell Grants have increased in the last 2 years. That's not any real news to us, but to the extent of which they increased and played out, particularly with this cohort in our system, is quite impressive. And you can see that from about 4 years back, it's really 2 years back, when the increases really took off. But now we have the average amount of Pell that a student receives is about $4,000. And if you take a look at the next slide, the percent of students receiving Pell out of this first-time, full-time cohort is now up to 47% of that group. Almost 50% of the first-time, full-time resident students that came to our system received a Pell Grant for an average amount of of about $4,000. And you can see where that's changed over time. It's sort of the cost of education, or the amount of the expected family contribution over time has sort of whittled itself away to where the percent of students getting Pell went from about 46% back in '03 and down to 2007, 2008. Then with the advent of the stimulus funds, they changed the Pell eligibility criteria. That's one thing that changed. The max amounts increased. The recession hit. More people were unemployed. Financial aid directors able to make more professional judgments in terms of, well, your parents used to make $80,000 a year, but now one of them is laid off and you're halfway through a year. Well, those students are able to receive Pell now. It's basically a perfect storm for students to get more Pell, which is a good thing. Now, if we take a look at one more slide, this is just a kind of a thing of interest here. Well, how does it break down in terms of numbers and the amount of distribution amounts in terms of dollar amounts that students received? Well, 53% of the 4,800 didn't receive a Pell Grant. And then you can just see for yourself the categories of how many students were in there that made up the 47% that did receive a Pell. Remember, the average is about 4,000. So I guess the major takeaway is that financial aid has gone up. The amount students are receiving in financial aid has gone up quite a bit in the last couple of years. And Pell is by and large, the driving factor behind it. And one of the ways we can, revalidate that is on the next slide. We take a look at overall state-funded financial aid. And I provided all the data here because it's kind of interesting, the different pots and areas where we get money from the state that directly goes to the campuses for financial aid. I excluded WWAMI, I excluded educator loan forgiveness, and just focused on what would a first-time, full-time resident student be likely to get. And so the takeaway is that state-funded financial aid per student FTE has declined as of about FY09. And that's largely due to the large increase in students and the sort of flat growth, a little bit of growth in the state-funded financial aid. We grew 5,000 students in between that time, and the amount of state-funded aid didn't follow. Okay, so price plus financial aid somewhere along the line equals affordability. And one way of taking a look at affordability is to take your average amount of tuition and fees and subtract the average amount of financial aid that all students, not just those receiving financial aid, but all students in that cohort received, which is, remember, the $3,600 overall, and take a look at it by campus. And what you find out is that net tuition and fees over the last 3 years have actually declined. So just looking at this chart, you could say it's more affordable, just in terms of tuition and fees, to attend the Montana University system than it has been for the majority of the last 9 years. But remember, we can't just focus on tuition and fees because there's obviously other costs. Remember, I'm worried about my son going to college and the overall cost. Well, so then we can calculate net price. Same thing, price of attendance minus average amount of financial aid received by everybody in this cohort. And even with my conservative, normalized numbers for cost of attendance across the system, it still went up. So you get inflationary costs related to room and board, books and supplies. You still have increasing costs for individuals to go to attend the Montana University system, regardless of what level you're at. And what I neglected to mention in here, there's just so much data here, it was a real struggle for me to figure out how I was going to present this concisely to you and have dashboard indicators. So throughout this, there's little links I forgot to mention. But literally, don't click on that, literally, there is campus-level data for all of this. Every one of these charts can be produced for every campus in the system. And there are interesting different trends slightly between campuses. And you can see what campus in this system are students most likely to get financial aid at. Where are the Pell students most likely to attend? And it's some really good stuff. So now moving on one more slide. And remember, that cost increase what you end up seeing as a result is loans. The one predominant fact that you can't get around is that students continue to take out more and more loans. We're still on the same cohort, first-time, full-time resident students. Remember net tuition decreasing? Well, look at the amount that loans have grown over that amount of time. 61% of those students, first-time, full-time resident students, are going to take out a loan for an average amount, and this includes plus loans now to parents, so it's basically the amount of loan per student, not just internalized within a single student, is $6,700 now. If you take a look at this for the entire system, every student, how much money was loaned in 2010, 2011 academic year? It's like $207 million. It was up from $150 million about 3 years ago. Just astonishing numbers. By the way, Pell, another example of how much it's increased in our system. 2 years ago, we dispersed $34 million of Pell. This last academic year, $62 million in Pell. It almost doubled. Same things happened in the nation. It's gone from like $15 billion in Pell to about $30 billion. So it's just, you can hear those numbers, but what was sort of exciting for me was to see it reflected in that cohort, that cohort who are Montanans who are coming to us for the first time to get an education in this state. So we've got a couple more slides here.
Tyler, I have a question
Sure.
Before you leave the loan one. It's been on the national news, of course, frequently, but including this last week. And we can demonstrate through your data in Montana that we've done a good job at keeping tuition and fees under control. And yet, just like every other state, our students are taking out more loans.
Yep.
And you and I and Mick and Sylvia have sat around and kicked that around, but we don't have a firm fix. We have speculation. Do you care to speculate for the board? It's part of the national trend.
It is.
Partly, so many of the students coming in ended up being affected by the recession, had less expected family contribution really available to them than the FAFSA maybe, expected. But it's a bit of a puzzle, but it's not necessarily, we're trying to do financial literacy.
Right.
We do, in fact, a pretty good job of it. I think you on the campuses do as well. But that is, of course, a troubling trend, that we can't absolve ourselves for responsibility, even though we've tried to keep the costs pretty steady for students. That rise in loans will affect their careers and their futures, correct?
Right, and I don't have an answer for it other than speculation. The cost of education, the cost of attendance, which we calculate our federal regulations, and our financial aid offices do it, continues to grow. It continues to grow because there's categories called other things like transportation. We have all seen the price of gas and how that goes up, so that incrementally increases. So students receiving Stafford loans, which is the vast majority of the people that are getting loans, whether they're unsubsidized or subsidized, are fitting into that, it's getting into they're underneath the cost of attendance, which is qualifying them for these loans. But, I don't know. The amount of aid that they receive went up at the same time. So it's sort of hitting on one of those topics. Like I said at the beginning of this, we don't have our finger on the pulse of financial aid as a system. I'm not saying that an individual campus doesn't, but I know that as a system, we aren't on the pulse of it.
I can speak to this a little bit, maybe. Of course, this is going to be speculation as well, but I can share my own personal experience and hope that you won't think that I'm completely irresponsible. But the giggles make me nervous. So I am a person that I would call myself very fiscally conservative. I pay very close attention to my personal finances. I feel very responsible. And I worked all the way through college, but I did take out some loans. I was Pell eligible and was very grateful for that as well. But the first time somebody sat me down and said, Teresa, this is what you're going to be paying monthly for the next 20 years, was my mandatory meeting and my exit counseling senior year, March of my last year in school. And it had never been framed to me like that. And this is where I hope I still have your respect. I could have calculated those numbers. I could have I received a folder that day that had a chart where it laid it all out. And it's that simple. I think, had I known, I certainly took out more loans than I needed to. I could have put more of that money that I was earning working towards it and lived the typical college life. I could have bought ramen and probably would have had I looked at those numbers. So I think financial aid literacy in those terms is how it would have worked for me. Don't worry about me though, I'm fine. Okay.
Okay, so just a couple more slides here. Then it begs a question: how is affordability and relating back to board policy and tuition philosophy affected enrollment shifts of this group, or have there been shifts of this group, first-time, full-time resident students in the system? And so you can go back to fall 2002 and take a look at, it's real easy in the bright green. Those are, that's MSU and U of M. How many first-time, full-time resident students attended then at UM and MSU? Over 26,000, close to 27,000. 2,700, correct me. Then you go to fall 2010 and you go to 2,351. They've gone down. Well, look at the blue portion at the bottom of that, our COTs, our two-year campuses. And you can see the shift there, and it goes from 700 students, 800 students, up to 1,400. Now in 2010, they make up 29% of the overall enrollment are at two-year, where in fall 2002 it was only 17% of our first-time, full-time resident students were at two-year. So it's difficult to say these are shifts, because at the same time, the number of high school graduates has backed off quite, not quite a bit, but it's slowed down and dropped a little bit since about fall 2008. So if you move to the next slide, this is a bunch of numbers, but it's something you might want to take a look at. You just look at that first category, total enrollment. I ranked these by change. So in fall 2002 at UM-COT, there were 222 first-time, full-time resident students that entered. And in fall 2010, there was 529 for a growth of 307. Just look at the last campus, UM-Missoula. They had the biggest decline, which I would have to say that was an enrollment shift. That there were the students, and this is where then immediately I kind of pitch the ball over to Bill MUS and say, well, you can tell us if it's really an enrollment shift or not. But when you're looking at it at a system level like this, it looks like that students were choosing to enter in at the UM-COT, which is exactly what we want, is them to start at a low-cost entry point to higher education that would then eventually get you to a partnered main campus. And, so, and then look, Billings COT is second, and then where's Billings? Well, MSUB, that's pretty close to, down towards the bottom, and then Montana Tech COT. So it's at the integrated COTs where we saw this enrollment shift taking place. And then, so the next question, begged the question, so I put it in there by age only because I thought, well, shoot, it's because of the recession, and you get some non-traditional students, they're coming back, and it was no difference between age. This was traditional students that were doing the same thing. So, and that's the end of my presentation, and I've had, at the Financial Aid Director's Office, I had someone say, so, okay, so what's your message to the Regents then? Well, I don't have one message. I mean, I wish I could say, well, this is obvious, you need to increase tuition, or this is obvious, you should freeze tuition based upon this information. I guess what my overall message to you is that we need to understand these trends. Pell makes up a big deal in this system. And just as sort of a warning, I guess, is that the 2012 budget template, federal budget, is already being prepared. The U.S. House has already pretty much agreed that they'll support a $2,000 cut to max Pell for next year. So they're already lining up against Pell, just like we passed the resolution at the last board meeting to support Pell. Another way of looking at it is a $100, $200 increase in tuition compared to a change in Pell is minor. Pell is where it's at in terms of affordability for students. So, and overall financial aid obviously is too, and state-supported financial aid is important. But those are some of the real key points that stuck out to me.
Angela? Excuse me, Regent McLean. Think there was a message that you didn't get a mic?
Would have been you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Mr. Trevor, for your great report and your great research and synthesizing it in a way that's understandable for all of us. First, I have a request and then a question. My request is, I think, to you and the other staff at the Office of the Commissioner, if you would copy slide 9 with perhaps a letter to each of the members of our congressional delegation, continue to raise that awareness. Encourage your colleagues, if you will, Madam Commissioner, across the nation to forward their Pell message, because I imagine it looks very similar in other states, so that we are not hampering our students' ability to attend college by cutting that Pell. That is of great concern. And now my question, as I looked at slide 10, where you had each of the state-funded financial aid, my question is there one management point for each of these pieces of financial aid within our system anywhere?
Mr. Chair, Regent McLean, our Student Financial Services, aka GSL, they do a lot of the management of this and coordination throughout the system. And I was in fact, the financial aid directors meeting that I was at, GSL was spearheading it and put it on. So they are a key player in this.
Follow up. Are there states that you're aware of that have single management points for the funded aid, the state funded aid?
Mr. Chair, Regent McLean, oh yeah, there are, varying degrees of centralization in financial aid, and we're far more towards the decentralized side of it.
Thank you.
Profligate spender.
I have a question on slide 3. And this is an indicator that I look to, especially as we begin to have our discussions on tuition. But what is how do they define the average income? Is that averaged over a certain amount of years?
The median household income?
Exactly, sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a calculation that's within a given year that the Census Bureau does, that, through American Family Survey. Again, this is where I would turn to my economist if we still had one employed, but we don't. But that's a federally driven number that comes up, is $48,000 for the median family income in Montana.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Could you go to slide 10, please? Oh, that's not the one. 12. I looked at that and thought, and just like with one of the other ones, I don't know how much comfort we can take in it, but if you look at that, it would appear we're kind of doing the right thing. Essentially, that's a 3% curve. It's essentially a rate of inflation curve. And everything you read nationally is the cost of education is expanding far greater than the rate of inflation, and essentially for 10 years we've matched the rate of inflation. And so we can't get carried away with ourselves, but we also don't need to hang our heads. Well, that's a good answer. That's a good slide.
Exactly, and if you back up one slide, the net tuition and fees, this is what you directly had decision-making power over, and look what it's done. Now, of course, we're taking in federal financial aid into consideration, but that is one of the the three legs of the stool. So it's looking good in terms of that. Obviously, when we move forward to price of attendance, it's going to continue to go up because inflation goes up. You have to feed students in a dorm, That's got to cost more when the price of goods and supplies are increasing.
Mr. Trevor, Tyler, part of this, I mean, you just have to give credit where it's due, is that dip is flat out attributable to the College Affordability Plan.
Absolutely.
That was put into place. And, you know, kudos to the executive and to the legislature then ultimately that went along with it. You were in the legislature at that time as well. But that's what has begun to change, is the inability of the legislature to, or I guess the state's economy to enable to support us or backfill enough so that we can keep the student share down the way that we were for, you know, essentially 2 to 4 years.
Thank you, Mr. Trevor. Okay, level 1 memorandum. These are items that are approved at the OT level. I don't know if there's a need to review them. You can take whatever depth you think is appropriate. Deputy Commissioner Moore.
Thank you, Chairman Barrett, members of the board. Pretty much straightforward things. I would point out a couple of things. Credit to this Board of Regents. You read them and you ask me questions, and I appreciate that, and so thank you for that. A couple of call-outs. Flathead here is offering the practical nursing degree at Browning through distance and hybrid delivery with an intent of passing that torch. They're doing that with some federal funding. That's being a good neighbor. That's a great project. Montana State University Bozeman is offering a Montana Dietetic Internship Program. That was a bottleneck in that professional program. We've had a shortage of internships in that dietetics profession for years, and kudos to Montana State University Bozeman for finding a way to do that as well. If there were any questions on it, we could take those now. Otherwise, that's just information.
All right, thank you. And then next, the Family Medicine Residency. Who's going to present that?
Well, let me kick that off, and then I'll pass it off to President Engstrom. I am currently serving on a Graduate Medical Education Advisory Council. To refresh your memory, you have one graduate medical education program at Montana State University Billings, if you will, or at Montana State University somehow. It operates through the Community Health Center in Billings. The folks in the state of Montana who are in the trenches realize that we have insufficient number of slots for graduate medical education in the state of Montana, and in fact, Dr. White is here and we'll be talking about this in a little bit, and he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're at the bottom in terms of the number of graduate medical education slots that we have. We have 6 slots right now in family medicine, 6 per year in Billings, and they're hoping to expand that to 8 per year. But that's all we have. And even the neighbor to the south, who shall remain nameless, but they have 2 family medicine residencies with 14 slots per year across the 2. And so we're woefully behind. And as we know, there are very few resources to address that problem. And there are some very creative people in this state, and that's my kickoff for it. So, President Engstrom.
Yeah, thank you, Deputy Commissioner Moore. There is an item on the screen that apparently somewhere along the way didn't get connected, so you haven't seen the written item. But I want to introduce to you Larry White, who is the director of our Area Health Education Center on the Missoula campus. And Larry has been working with the hospitals in Missoula and beyond to begin the design and planning for a program to increase these medical residency slots. And so I've asked him just to give you a 2 or 3 minute introduction to this. At some point, maybe August or September, we would be back to you in all likelihood with an approval item. Larry?
Board members and Commissioner Stearns, my name is Larry White, as President Engstrom has just mentioned. The need, as Ms. Moore just pointed out, is that Montana is 50th in the nation, 2 per 100,000 graduate medical education slots. The median in the United States is 25. So that portends an incredibly big problem in meeting the primary care physician needs in our state in the future with the increasing demand for primary care as it's forecasted. The work on this began with a request that came out of the Billings program and the University of Washington School of Medicine Family Practice Network. About 2 years ago, the medical community of Missoula was approached about the feasibility, their interest in developing this program. The Western AHEC was asked to conduct that feasibility. We've been working on that for the period of time of 2 years. We're currently in the work of developing an accreditation application to the ACGME, the national organization that accredits all residency programs. That which we are proposing is a 3-year family medicine residency. It would be very comparable to the one that you know about in Billings at Riverstone. We would be forecasting approximately 10 residents per year for a grand total of 30, 24 of which would be based in Missoula and 6 here in Kalispell at Kalispell Regional Medical Center. We are forecasting this to be able to articulate the first class in July of 2013. Organizationally, this is a very critical issue because we have to stipulate to the accrediting body who the sponsoring organization is. And so after about a year and a half of evaluation of the options for how to home this operation, that is, who would be the employer of the faculty and the residents, the group that has been meeting on this has elected to choose the University of Montana to be that sponsor pending your approval. There's a consortium that has been developed that is going to be the operators of this residency in terms of the clinical education. They are in Missoula, Community Medical Center, St. Patrick Hospital and Health Sciences Center, Partnership Health Center, which is the Community Health Center in Missoula, and then the University of Montana, and in Kalispell, as I said, Kalispell Regional Medical Center. The organization structure proposed would be one where it would be a new division under the College of Health Professions and Biomedical Sciences, assisted by an advisory board consisting of representatives from each of the consortium members. As I mentioned, the faculty and the residents would be employed at the University of Montana. The cost to the Montana University system would be zero. In other words, the practice sites where the physicians are being trained would bear the costs contractually for all of the expenses associated with this program. That's, in a nutshell, what is being envisioned, and be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Well, I have a question, Dr. White, and I don't know whether you or President Ekstrom would be best to answer it. What I'm trying to get in my mind is the relationship, if any, and if there should be any relationship between this and the WWAMI students that were, because it would seem, following the premise that you have there, I wish we'd had the time to read this ahead of time, because I certainly concede a lot that, you know, the retention, the high percentage of retention, and that's, of course, an objective we have with the WWAMI students. And so wouldn't it make sense to somehow try to, this is not the right word, but get some kind of articulation between the WWAMI students and the students who are going to come here, then we have double dosed them in terms of retention. I'm trying to think, how does this work relate, if at all, to WWAMI? Because it seems like there should be some connection, and I don't see one there. Now, maybe there shouldn't be, but it just jumps out at me that there should.
Well, the residency program would participate in the national match, and that allows any graduate medical student in the country to apply to a program. The selection process is where that fine piece comes in, Chairman Barrett, where there would be criteria that would have yet to be developed that might give particular emphasis or special consideration to a WWAMI student. For those of you who haven't read this, 70% of the residents that have been trained in Billings for the last 10 years have stayed in Montana. That's a great value, great return on investment. That's as good as I can do it quickly.
Larry, let me follow up if I could, Chairman. Then of the students that are in Billings doing residencies, do you know how many of those came through the WWAMI program? Were those mostly Montana people who came through WWAMI? Is that something we know?
I think Dr. Moore probably knows.
I wish Roxanne Fehrenwald were here to answer that question, but I believe that probably around 20%, 15 to 20%. It's been a very attractive residency for a lot of medical schools. So the good news is we're importing physicians that way. There is, to answer the question about the link, Regent Barrett, the WWAMI Trust program that Dr. Erickson has talked to this group about would encourage that group to go ahead and do their residency at one of our 2 residency programs. And the data are clear that if they do their residency in the state, they're much more likely to stay. So the trust program would essentially gear them up for that from the get-go.
This would be in family medicine, is it pediatrics or is it separate? Or just general practice medicine? How about, family medicine is not a term I quite.
Family practice, family medicine is a specialty that treats adults as well as children.
Okay.
It's contrasted. Let me introduce to you Dr. Ned Vasquez. He is the interim medical director for the program. He became a half-time employee at the AHEC April the 1st and is working on this whole project with us. And Dr. Vasquez, do you have a comment about the selection of the students?
Yes, thank you for having us here today. I think part of the answer to your question is that as WWAMI students come through the tracks that we have in Montana, they'll have contact with us and they will see how the residency operates. They'll have an opportunity to do some of their rotations with us, and that's going to bolster and strengthen the number of those students who apply to our residency programs.
Hey, thank you. Anybody else have, Regent Robertson?
I had a question related to, similar to what you were talking about, is what type of professions are they going into once they complete their residency? And the reason I ask is that I remember a discussion that I participated in about a year or 2 ago, and a representative from Blue Cross Blue Shield was there talking about the type of careers, medical careers that students are going into, and it seems to be more specialized, but is there still a demand that you're seeing for these type of professions? Because we're hearing something else.
Surely. I'm going to let Dr. Vasquez answer. He is a board-certified family practitioner, has been practicing in Missoula for 25 years. He knows all about medical specialties.
So just to be clear, residency is the training that people participate in after medical school. It's 3 years for family medicine, internal medicine. Another example would be general surgery is 5 years. So this is very specifically directed towards family medicine. The need is huge, and that in part is reflected in our being last in the nation. We're not attracting people here who will stay here and practice family medicine. I forgot the rest of your question, sorry.
Well, you're on the right track because, again, even though the need is huge, it seems like the students are electing to go more towards the specialized medicine because, quite frankly, they can make more money doing that.
And that has been the trend now for the better part of a decade. However, there's been some good news in the last couple of years. The trend, especially in what we've looked at in the UW network in the Pacific Northwest, has started to move in the other direction. So there are an increasing number of medical students wanting to match in family medicine. and there are an increasing number of students who are directed in that direction for specialty. The UW directors, I don't think, understand exactly why that has occurred. I think it's in part because UW has done a great job of trying to choose residents as they're matriculating into medical school who they believe will do that kind of practice and that kind of service. One of the other points to make is that the reason to locate this program in a community health center is there's growing data that if you do that, those physicians are more likely to serve in underserved areas and in community health center settings. So there are things we can do to continue to foster that process. But you're correct about that trend historically.
Thank you. Any additional questions? Well, okay, first, President Karras and then Chancellor Groseth.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, I just wanted to say that I am on the board of the Northwest Healthcare Kalispell Regional Medical Center, and we had a meeting 2 nights ago where we approved a resolution to support this project because there is a need for primary care physicians, and they're very difficult to recruit to rural areas, and we've been looking at that for a number of years on our board here in Northwest Montana, and our hospital works with many hospitals in northwestern Montana. And this does provide an opportunity to bring people to a rural area and have them become familiar with us, we become familiar with them, and they are more likely to stay here and work here, and it is a great way to recruit excellent physicians to our state and our area. So I want to know that our hospital here supports it.
Thank you. Chancellor Groseth.
Mr. Chairman, what would you say might account for the difference in the numbers of residents that are currently in Billings and the number you would anticipate after 3 years?
The short answer is money. The graduate medical education funding through Medicare and Medicaid. I won't begin to get into how complicated that is. But the amount of federal funding for residency training is capped at the highest number of residents that you have during your first 3 years. And Billings started with 6, so that's how they got capped. So one of the tricks that we are trying to finesse is to determine what's the maximum number that we can train in our first 3 years so that we can obtain the maximum amount of federal funding to sustain it into the out years. Graduate medical education funding is the most complicated, arcane thing you ever heard of. It makes this other stuff look simple, actually.
All right. Thank you. Any additional questions? I think, oh, excuse me, President Engstrom.
Chairman Barrett, just to summarize then, so we will need to come back to you for formal approval to host this project. So as you heard, the Planning Committee has recommended that the University of Montana be the sponsor, the host for the project. And so upon application of the accreditation paperwork, we'll have to show who the host is, and that we want that to be the University of Montana. So we'll come back to you as soon as it works out for all of for your meeting schedule to request that approval.
All right, thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Robinson.
Mr. Chairman, when you do, it would be good to have the data to help show what the demand is and how we can meet that demand, what the trends are, what we were talking about. It would be nice to see.
All right, thank you. Okay, the next item is who makes the MUS comment, or it says here Dean McGovern? What is this?
Oh, I'm sorry. I wasn't back to the comment. We have added a section for comments from the campuses into this agenda at the recommendation of a few people. And so I think Dean McGovern is in the audience someplace to do this. There he is.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Commissioner Stearns. I appreciate the time. I have a brief presentation. My mother taught me well, and when the bar is being set up, you got to know your cues. So I will be brief, I promise. I came here, we are still in the midst of our programming. The Montana Campus Compact is still doing programming through the summer, but I have a brief synopsis, and I'm passing out some handouts, and I also have some slides to share with you on some highlights from the year among Montana Campus Compact member campuses. And I think we're queuing up the slides. Pardon? Oh, okay. Yeah, for those of you who don't know, the Montana Campus Compact is a membership organization of 19 member campuses around the state, and Montana is one of 35 states that has a compact. It's an organization committed to the civic engagement of students and faculty. Our mission is to expand and deepen the opportunities for students to get involved in their communities, to enhance their educations in several ways. We here in Montana have, as I mentioned, 19 member campuses. They are scattered throughout the state. All 8 MUS institutions are members of the compact. We have all 3 community colleges as members of the compact. All 3 private institutions are members of the compact. And 5 of the 7 tribal colleges are members of the compact. I have some national survey data that I wanted to share with you, and that is on this sheet. Every year, the National Campus Compact Office sends out a national survey, which is conducted each fall, and surveys member campuses throughout the country on service engagement. Montana students engage in roughly, according to those results for 2010, Montana students engage in roughly 7.5 hours of service per week, compared to the national average of 3.6 hours. In Montana, that computes to about 2,470,000 hours of community service that is contributed by Montana students. And with the independent sector, roughly calculating service hours at $14.89 per hour of service, that translates to about $36,778,000 worth of community service or contribution back to the community. Certainly no small contribution. In terms of faculty using service learning for their integrated into their courses, Montana faculty, about 5% report using service learning, and that compares to about 7% of faculty nationally. That's something that we would like to work on here in Montana. We do know that among the faculty in Montana across disciplines, that faculty call service learning different things and therefore sometimes aren't able to identify it as such. But we would like to increase the number of faculty members that have integrated service learning as part of their course, no matter the discipline. Montana students address issues in the community in education, healthcare, mentoring, and family concerns at a higher rate than other parts of the country, higher percentages of those issue areas. I don't know if this is going to work here. Yeah, if you can, Summer, if you could advance the slide. In terms of volunteering writ large in Montana, outside of higher education, Montanans rank 9th in the country in terms of rate of volunteering. 35.5% of Montanans volunteer or regularly volunteer their time. That ranks 9th in the country among the 50 states. On average, Montanans give about 44 hours per resident per year, which ranks 8th in the country, which is quite outstanding. And there are a few reasons for that, why Montana is ripe for civic engagement and community service. Data indicate that attachment to community and home ownership, low foreclosure rate, about 68%
of Montanans own a home, and that compares to about 66% nationally. So that contributes to the high rate of volunteerism in Montana. We have short commutes in Montana. Our average commute per resident is about 18 minutes versus 25 minutes in other places around the country. And we have a disproportionate amount of nonprofit capacity in our state. We have 9.2 nonprofits per 1,000 residents, and it's about 4.5 around the rest of the country. In terms of education, 91% of our population has graduated from high school versus 85% around the rest of the country, and we're about the same at college education, 27% in Montana and 27% around the country. The Montana Campus Compact just completed a strategic planning process, and we the board approved strategic priorities, and you have those before you and up on the screen. In short, they are to expand civic engagement opportunities, which is part of our mission, increase the positive impact that higher education has in the community identified needs, and those are identified needs by the community, not by students or faculty. We wish to strengthen the organization and the network to maximize civic engagement potential, and we wish to instill long-term civic engagement habits in the alumni that come through our colleges and universities. Some of the ways we hope to do that is through the programs and initiatives that we've either started or we intend to start. And our two largest programs are the MTCC Campus Corps, which is a very large AmeriCorps program, often going unsung. It contributes to quite a few community projects around Montana. And we also have the MTCC Vista project, which engages recent graduates in community service and capacity building around Montana. We produce or recognize athletes in service at the two large institutions, at the University of Montana and Montana State University. Every fall we provide an award. Athletes that participate in various sports are vetted for their involvement in community service, and we recognize them at the Bobcat Grizzly football game or the Brawl of the Wild. We challenge all of our campuses each spring in a Donate Life Today challenge for registering organ donors and tissue donors. We do service learning workshops with faculty around the state to help them integrate service into their coursework. We do meaning of service reflection workshops with faculty, staff, and students all over the state. This is using a piece of literature to anchor a discussion about the greater good of civic engagement and service. And recently, the National Campus Compact designed Newman Civic Fellowships, and these were awarded for the first time this spring. 135 roughly were awarded around the country, and we had 6 students that received that fellowship this spring. In terms of our, if I just could go over quickly the larger programs, the Montana Campus Corps program, that's the next slide. The Montana Campus Corps program engages about 950 college students enrolled in the largest AmeriCorps program in the state. This past year, 2010, 2011, they contributed around 475,000 hours of community service. And they earned for that service, because it's an AmeriCorps program, about $1.6 million in education awards. And we know from data that not only do our Campus Corps students graduate at an incredibly high rate relative to the larger student population, it's about 92 to 94% of our Campus Corps students graduate with a degree. They also tend to spend their education awards here in Montana. So the program is a terrific program to not only develop members and develop students and help them along with their education, but it brings a lot of money into the state of Montana, a lot of federal money into the state of Montana. Those 949 Campus Corps members mobilized as part of their term of service roughly 3,600 community volunteers outside of their campus. The Montana Campus Compact VISTA program supported 35 VISTAs. These are full-time VISTA members, which is the Domestic Peace Corps. We placed 35 members around the state in different locations. Those folks recruited 2,700 student or community volunteers throughout the year. Those 35 people procured about $350,000 in grants and other funding. They created $116,000 in in-kind donations to community projects, and they generated 330 campus community partnerships. And we're very, very proud of those campus community partnerships. When a campus or a community member gets a VISTA, that's one of the things that we ask them to pull together and use key stakeholders to pull together a campus community partnership. We're very, very proud of that. Both the Campus Corps and VISTA programs are federally funded, and we annually rewrite these grants to bring it into the state of Montana. Yeah, go ahead and fly through there. Some photos of members. And finally, the Montana Campus Compact Donate Life Today Challenge. Throughout the spring, it was the month of April, we challenged all campuses, all students on all of our campuses to register new organ and tissue donations on the national and regional registry. We had 521 total organ donor registrants. Flathead Valley Community College won the challenge with 208. You see 124 from the University of Montana Western, 75 new registrants from Montana State Northern, 51 from Montana State Bozeman, and 28 from the University of Montana Missoula. All campuses had numbers. These were the top 5 in new donor registrations. The Newman Civic Fellows this year, I mentioned 135 students were recognized by National Campus Compact around the country. 6 were from Montana. These are the 6. The University of Montana Western, MSU Bozeman, Flathead Valley Community College. Catherine Emerson at FVCC was honored last week at commencement here at FVCC by the president of National Campus Compact. MSU Billings, the University of Montana Helena, and the University of Montana Missoula all had Newman Civic Fellows this year. And the Montana Youth Serve Scholarships, this is a partnership with the Governor's Office for Community Service, and our board presidents contribute $500 per student to a scholarship. It's a $1,000 scholarship, $500 per student coming from the Governor's Office, $500 coming from our board presidents, CEOs, and that is awarded to 100 high school students each fall, and they must attend a Montana Campus Compact institution, and they must complete 100 hours of community service during their senior year in high school. And finally, I would be remiss to not mention a couple of national recognitions this year. Montana State University Bozeman was recognized by getting the Carnegie classification for community engagement this year, classification that was hard fought and a large process, a long process to get done. The University of Montana received it in 2008, and MSU just received it last fall, so congratulations to them. And just a few days ago, President Obama's Higher Education Community Service Honor Roll was released, and the University of Montana Missoula was designee or an honoree, and Flathead Valley Community College. So both of those campuses deserve congratulations. So.
Thank you for your information. Absolutely. Are there any comments or questions? Chancellor Gilmore.
Mr. Chairman, very quickly, I've been associated with Campus Compact for 13 years now, and I have to tell you that it's been one of the better programs that I've had the pleasure of working with, but to a large extent because of Dean McGovern, and I don't think we tell him often enough what a great job he's done with this. President Dennison had the vision to support and push Campus Compact in Montana, and Dean carried out that vision. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And you just did for us what we should have been doing then, is telling him that he's been doing a good job. So thank you both.
Thank you, Chancellor Gilmore.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, is there any public comment on anything that came before the committee? Any public comment? If not, we'll turn it back to Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I didn't mean to catch you when you were back there changing your socks. And it is precisely 4:30 in time for the two-year community college committee.
That's exactly right, which is Chairman. Commissioner says we're going to plod on through so we get to dinner on time.
I'll plod.
All right. Chairman Hamilton.
You can sprint.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The first item on our agenda is an action item, the proposed mission vision for public two-year education in Montana. And I'm going to ask Dean Seck to lead the conversation with Dean Bingham and Dean Schaefer. I'm sorry, not Dean Seck, Deputy Commissioner Seck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin, and while Dean Bingham is being seated, I'd just also like to take this moment to recognize and thank Commissioner Stearns, and especially for what she has done in her tenure to support and grow two-year education across Montana. Thank you, Commissioner Stearns. This is I believe, a historic moment for higher education, and particularly two-year education in the state of Montana. And hopefully this will, today and tomorrow, will become historic days, because we will be discussing and ultimately you voting on a comprehensive two-year education mission and vision for the state of Montana, something that has never existed in this state. So this is really significant work, and I would like to ask very briefly Dean Bingham and Dean Schaefer to make some comments. Dean Bingham?
I was going to let the younger buck go first, but
maybe he is.
I am? Oh, thanks. I'll tell my wife that. Members of the, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, or sorry, Madam Chair, members of the committee, board. I think we, presenting before you today, as Deputy Commissioner has indicated, very exciting piece of information that I believe the two-year college CEOs, and I also would include the community college presidents, are very excited about, because it gives us a guidance and direction of what we would like to do and see it happen here in the state of Montana. Just to give you a brief overview of how this came about, we were charged with putting together a small committee of two-year CEOs and others that would have a direct impact on putting together a mission for two-year education in the state of Montana. We pulled together a small strategic planning committee, went to work, and in a matter of about 4 hours, what you see before you here now is the draft of that mission vision and some very important key attributes for two-year education in the state of Montana. That was a very collaborative experience, one that I think set the tone for future strategic groups to pull together and talk about what we need to do and have happen within the state of Montana two-year education. You will notice that, again, this particular mission is very specific in regards to taking on the comprehensive mission of a two-year college and using the community college model in which to do that. In fact, those key attributes speak specifically to the comprehensiveness of a community college mission. And the direction that we would like to propose to you today in this mission and vision and key attributes be the core of two-year education in the state of Montana.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'll be brief. The only other point that I'd like to stress is just as community college and two-year education and institutions across the United States look a little different, have different configurations and governance structures, they embody these key attributes that you see before you. And we anticipate that as you charge us with implementing this mission and vision here in Montana, the key attributes, the roles, the pieces, the values of two-year education within this mission document will be embodied by all of the two-year campuses and the institutions offering two-year education, although they may look slightly different between institution to institution.
Thank you both. Last Wednesday, we held a retreat in Helena with all of the two-year leaders in the state, and I shared with the Commissioner and Chairman Hamilton after the meeting that probably one of the major takeaways from that meeting was, I think, a real commitment, a real belief into this comprehensive mission and vision, and also the feeling that the committee really wants this board to hold us accountable as we move forward. And interestingly, yesterday I received a call from the New York Times, a reporter from the New York Times who indicated that they had heard we were doing some innovative stuff here in Montana in two-year education, as evidenced by this work and also our work with the Lumina Foundation for Education. And so they followed up with an interview yesterday afternoon for about 45 minutes, and they're also going to be interviewing President Karras. But I think that's really exciting. I think that really speaks to the word that's getting out and the incredible challenge that we have ahead of us, but we really feel we're up to it.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Seck. Do I see consensus from the committee that I'm sorry, we should probably have questions. I'm trying to rush. Any comments from the campuses, faculty, staff, or students on this issue, on this item? Commissioner?
Yes, Regent Hamilton, I have a question. Tomorrow, you actually have a motion you'll be making.
Right.
Do you mind sort of reading what the motion will? Because I think that you've drafted already, so that they don't have to vote on it now. They'll vote on it tomorrow. But we do want to signal to the two-year executives who've been working very, very hard on this, as well as to the funders across the nation, that we take this very seriously and that we really have the board's attention and traction to work on this. So I just would like to call attention to that.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. The motion that would be considered tomorrow would read something like this. I move the board adopt the comprehensive two-year education mission and vision as presented. In addition, the board requests Deputy Commissioner Seck to work with the campus leaders to provide updates through the two-year and community college education committee on the progress of implementation as outlined in the 5 College Now strategies. And those 5 strategies are the first information item on our agenda for today. Any questions or comments from the regents? Do I see Regent Rob?
Thank you. I just wanted to commend the campuses, the two-year college campuses, for the hard work, because we know that you all have different ways of operating and different qualities as well to offer, and so coming together to do something like this is truly historic. So thank you for your efforts.
Any additional comments or questions? Do I see consensus from the committee members? Oh, I'm sorry.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I have one question, and that is, I've heard various things about this being an absolute mandate to the campuses, or that it might not be. And my concern is this: if it's a mandate to the campuses and we're permitted to carry that out in a way such that the campus, the entire campus, meets the requirements of two-year education as outlined, we have no problem with it. If we have to do that in one place on the campus, one building on the campus, then it becomes very expensive for us. And we do have concerns with it.
Thank you, Chancellor
you.
Gilmore. I think that's noted, and I believe that the conversation, at least from the two deans at the table, was that we would work to accommodate the different kind of management structures that we have on our campuses. I see Regent Barrett looks, do you have? No. Okay. Okay, I'm going to try one more time. Do we have consensus from the committee to move this forward for approval tomorrow? Yes. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is information item A, the revised College Now strategies and goals. Deputy Commissioner Seck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll also be brief on this. As I mentioned at our last meeting in March, the Lumina Foundation for Education did allow us to revisit our strategies, fine-tune them, revise them with the completion of our first year of the grant, and we did. And so the 5 strategies which you see before you were submitted by the Commissioner to the Lumina Foundation and were approved. Strategy 1 is probably one of the most important strategies, which really is significant because it involves extending the comprehensive community college mission to each of the 5 COTs, engaging our 3 comprehensive community colleges for support, and engaging in a branding and rebranding process for not only the COTs but all of two-year education in Montana. We did, the Commissioner appointed a committee to work on this. That committee met briefly today at lunch, and I'm pleased to announce that Chancellor Rolf Groseth and I will co-chair that committee. We did agree to meet for a one-day retreat in mid-June to really start to get some traction behind this and going. And so we will hope to have a much more substantial update to prepare and present to you at the August retreat.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Any comments or questions? Mr. Villa.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, first I have to give my kudos to John, Dr. Seck, for his hard work on this, and the transition seems to have gone very, very smoothly from Commissioner Moe to Commissioner Seck. But you're now in a very dangerous place because you have a termed-out governor and a now termed-out commissioner who want to get a lot done over the course of the next year. You know, we over the next several months will be engaging even more in this process. Pat Wise with our Office of Economic Development is our point person, and I don't know if you've ever met a good kayaker who never slows down, but Pat is on a mission from the corner office to expedite this process, get it going faster, and I guess more of a both a congratulations at attaboy as well as a heads up. The governor's office really wants to put some juice behind this in the waning days of our administration.
Yes, sir.
And yes, ma'am.
And yes, ma'am.
Madam Chair, if I may make a comment. Each one of these strategies is kind of interesting, but I particularly call attention to strategy 4, if you scroll down to that, because that affects, I think, all the campus leaders, but especially Presidents Cruzado and Engstrom, as you put together with a fairly short time frame, allocate your distributions to the campuses. Please notice that we have pledged to us and to others that there will be some recognition of performance-based components as we look at the financial needs of campuses. And they will involve metrics, it involves rewarding institutions for increased productivity, et cetera. And I think that was something, Regent Buchanan, we had
that was one of the key things that came out of reform and reinvention, was to use metrics and performance and not just enrollment. And so this is at least one part of our system where it's been embedded as a distinct goal. And I just don't want anyone to overlook it. Thank you.
Any questions from the faculty, other campuses, students? Any questions or further comments from the board? Seeing none, we'll move on to our next information item, Carl Perkins update. And Deputy Commissioner Steck, would you explain the key questions that are attached to these and what the expectations are for the board?
Yes, we, behind each of these agenda items, have identified some key questions which are designed to hopefully help you think through questions you may have both at this meeting and at future meetings with respect to these agenda items. And a brief update on Carl Perkins, as I shared with you back in March, the U.S. Department of Education has been dealing with budget cuts itself, as well as most of the federal government. And through the continuing resolution, which was approved, the Department of Education has eliminated all tech prep funding in the United States. And that impact for us, for the state of Montana, is $428,000 for this next year and beyond. You voted back in November to roll up tech prep funding into the general Perkins funding formula, which is 35% post-secondary, 65% secondary, and that was slated to happen next year. That, of course, will not happen because that funding has been eliminated. In addition, the continuing resolution cut about $172,000 from our Perkins funding, and again, that's 35-65. So we've had an impact as a state around $600,000. Next Friday, my staff and the staff from the Office of Public Instruction will be holding a retreat to discuss how we will deal with this. And I think we've already been discussing this, and I think we have a pretty good plan and are working hard to minimize the impact on the campuses. But I think the bigger question that we will be addressing is how do we take the remaining funds that we have left in Perkins, about $5.2 million, and best use it strategically to benefit the students of Montana, both at the secondary level, the post-secondary level, and really put some teeth behind the Big Sky Pathways Initiative is one example, and what we can do to also leverage Perkins initiatives with other initiatives like College Now and dual credit. So again, I'll have more to report at our next board meeting.
Any comments or questions on this item from the board or anybody else? Any public comment? We'll move on to our next information item, an update on the Gallatin College program.
Yes, I'd like to now call on Dean Hyatella to provide an update.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Regents. I'm Bob Hyatella, the Dean of Gallatin College Programs. I appreciate the opportunity to give you an update here. It's been a year since you approved the transition and created Gallatin College Programs, and we moved under MSU Bozeman. In June of 2010, we transitioned. We were able to make that transition happen within 30 days as a result of very good support and work from our friends at MSU Great Falls that really helped make that happen. And also the folks down at MSU Bozeman, the folks there stepping up and really helping get that transition complete. It was a lot of work, but we were able to pull it off by the good work we had from those units. In August of 2010, we were named Gallatin College Programs, and we moved into Hamilton Hall. You can see here the new space, Gallatin College Programs. As part of that, we were able to get 3 dedicated classrooms, which was a big help for our programming. You'll remember some of our discussion about classrooms and space a year ago. So you can see the CAD lab here, which was a huge upgrade for that program, along with some other classrooms, staff offices, a tutoring lab, and other support service space. I show this slide just to kind of show how we transitioned into MSU Bozeman and how we set up some of the support services there. So you can see at the top things like facilities and IT support pretty much is handled by existing services at Bozeman. So that really is a good example. We were able to maximize those efficiencies. Things like program development, grant writing, advising, those are the staff of the 2-year unit Gallatin College Programs that provide. Down the road, as we grow, something like financial aid, we may be able to have part-time staff devoted to the college and on site to do that. For now, it's working very well with the financial aid office at MSU. In terms of enrollment, I thought I'd show you the workforce programs, and these are the 4 existing programs we had a year ago. We did not add any programs during that time as we were going through the transition. So you can see the enrollment shot up quite a bit in those programs, and those 4 programs are pretty much pushing capacity. The developmental education courses have grown also, although to a lesser degree. These are the math, the writing, and the academic practice courses that we teach. And one more comment on the enrollment. It was shown earlier. We were up, I think it was 22.5% in the last year. That's kind of the advantage of having small numbers, of course. But we're up to 280 FTE at Gallatin College. Some of the service increases, both the transition and then the move into Hamilton Hall, allowed us to increase some services to students. Our walk-in traffic from student contacts went up 90%. Our student use of the tutoring lab for math and writing support increased 130%, and then student advising meetings went up 80%. So being in a central location on campus, I think the exposure with the transition, all of that came together to really increase services to students. Community support has continued. I know when Commissioner Stearns and Regent Borenpol were out for the listening session last fall, they got to experience some of that, but we've had a very active advisory board in the community and program advisory boards also. This is a photo of an empty wing at Bozeman High School. They had done a high school renovation and moved into the new space, and they have 11 empty classrooms here. So we've worked out an agreement to use some of the high school space for new workforce programs. And then the bottom point, the City of Bozeman in January approved mill levy funding, the equivalent of 1.5 mills for 2.5 years for new program development. And that comes out to about $120,000 a year. So we were thrilled to get that support from the city for our new programs. So looking kind of down the growth path for the college, we expect to be developing new workforce programs to meet local needs.
As part of that, we just started a process to develop a local workforce needs assessment. We had one done back in 2006, and we really feel with the changes in the economy, it's prudent to do a new one to help drive our program development activities. So we're taking that on. We're also looking to expand our dual enrollment offerings. We started our first dual enrollment course this year, and we have a couple more coming on next year. But there's been a lot of interest from local high schools for more dual enrollment courses. And then work towards the development of a transfer degree. As you saw in the community college mission, the importance of the transfer degree, we recognize. We get a lot of interest from folks in the community for that. Just to show you our 2011 budget, and this is, I think, the same as you saw a year ago when we had our transition packet and financials in there. So this is the budget we're operating on this year. And then the next slide will show you moving ahead in 2012 what our budget will look like with the two new programs that are proposed, the bookkeeping and medical assistant program. It's the same general fund allocation. We added in the City of Bozeman mill levy funding, which will support new programs. And then expenses go up a bit with the new programs. Tuition revenue goes up with the students in those programs, and you can see kind of how that plays out. So challenges moving forward for Gallatin College. Like all growing two-year colleges, dedicated classroom space is always a challenge. The Bozeman High School classrooms will solve that in the short term, but their projections are at some point they'll be moving back into those classrooms. So it's a time-limited answer for us. And also funding for new programs. That's always a challenge, and we need to continue to work on those issues. And I wanted to end with just a photo of the staff. I know you were talking earlier today about faculty and staff, and it's my privilege every day to work with this dedicated and talented group of faculty and staff. This is a photo from our student recognition event, which was part of the graduation weekend. So with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions from the board? Regent Buchanan.
Congratulations to this effort. And, as we talk about limited resources and new and creative ways to get things done, the way that Dean Hietala and President Cruzado have engaged the local community to put some money up behind their interest and request for the services that we're adding is exactly a model I think we need to continue to pursue, and I appreciate your energy and effort to get it done. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Bob.
All right.
Any Deputy Commissioner Seck.
Madam Chair, President Cruzado, I'd just like to say that I think what's been happening at Gallatin College programs is phenomenal. I enjoy working with Dean Hietala and appreciate his energy, his enthusiasm, and my compliments all the way.
All right, thank you.
The next item on our agenda is a conversation with the Flathead Valley Community College Board of Trustees, and I'm going to turn this portion of our agenda over to Chairman Christian.
Okay. I see a number of them anywhere here. If you guys want to come forward and join us at this front table, we'd like to have you.
There's some spillover chairs on the side, too.
Yeah, there's some chairs on the side, too. Just feel free to. And thank you for having us here and welcoming us back. Commissioner and I had a good listening session with this group and a broader group a few months back, and we always enjoy conversation and interaction between the boards. So thank you guys for being here. I believe President Karras is going to introduce her board for us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Commissioner Stearns, it's my great pleasure to introduce 5 of my 7 bosses who always direct me in the right direction. They are very visionary trustees who have really created this wonderful college that you're getting to enjoy and that we're hosting you for the meeting. But Chairman Bob Nicetoon, Tom Harding, Mark Holston, Tom McElwain, and Shannon Lund are 5 of our 7 trustees who are able to be with you today, and I want to thank them for taking time out of their busy schedules to come spend some time and have a conversation with you.
May I ask the first question? This is to be a conversation, and Bob, I know we'll just use first names and be comfortable, and we're right on schedule, just so that, of course, by 5:30 we can get to the reception. But it's not very often that we have, as a board, a chance to visit, so I'd say we have at least 15, 20 minutes, and I guess one of my questions, several of you just stood for re-election, did you not? Raise your hand if you just were re-elected to the board, and congratulations. I know that
There was one other, too. So.
Yeah, well, it was a tough race, and good for you. I guess my question is, since I mean, people across the state knew that Flathead Valley Community College is, primo. People across the country know that, and yet you had quite a bit of attention on a race that must have raised issues. I'd like, if you would, briefly, any of you, tell us what 2 or 3 of those issues seem to be about a community college, value of a community college, that we all can learn from, or that you learn from, or that you'd share with us.
Sure. Mr. Chair, Commissioner Stearns, first, thank you for coming up to the Flathead. We tried to dial up as good a day out there for you as we could today. It looks like a great evening for our reception here. So on behalf of the entire folks here in Flathead County, we welcome you to our campus. Good question, Sheila. I think that Flathead Valley Community College has always been kind of a beacon of hope and prosperity for our community throughout all of the economic downturn, with unemployment rates throughout northwest Montana, double digits, Lincoln County close to 20%. People have gravitated towards Flathead Valley Community College as a place to go for further education and so on. We make it easy and affordable, accessible, provide excellent counseling and so on. And so, you've seen our enrollment numbers, and they came here for a reason, because they're about to change their life. Well, certainly the college has become more prominent with regards to its stature in the community. There have been a number of folks that said that they'd like to perhaps have a better idea as to how to move the college forward. And we did have 5 challengers run for 4 seats. Actually, I was unopposed. No one ran against me, so I'd like to think it's something special that I had, but I know that's not realistic, right, guys? But we did, and that's their prerogative, and we welcomed the challenge. We worked hard to understand what their thoughts and perspectives were with regards to the college. We felt like perhaps that there was a stronger political message and political ideology that was coming from the challengers, but nevertheless, I think my colleagues and I that stood for election approached this, that the institution is bigger than political principles and personalities, and therefore we really tried to put together a grassroots effort of an entire cross-section of the Greater Valley here to come out and support this campus and support the incumbents. We chose not to get down and talk about specific political issues or what to do with Perkins and what to do with Pell Grants and things like that. What we wanted to do is to create opportunities for people to come to school here and to enhance their lives. We had 500 people that put their names on a full-page ad to basically say we support FECC and the incumbents, and we raised a few $1,000s, ran some ads, and ended up with $800 extra left over to actually go to the FECC Foundation at the end of the day, because we didn't spend $800 as part of our campaign. But through all of this, it's really created an awareness, I think, on the part of the trustees about the importance of transparency, accountability, fiscal responsibility, and a number of factors that we've always practiced, but I think it needed to have a heightened awareness.
I think that it was a learning experience for us. We never take anything for granted. While the numbers, if you look at the poll results and so forth, we were soundly reelected. But on the other hand, we cannot assume that we're always going to run the college the same old way with the same sort of format. We need to be challenged as to, is there a better approach to delivering education? Is there political ideologies that we should understand and respect? And the answer is clearly yes, we do. In the end, I think it was, while there were times that it was frustrating about some of the things that were said about us and about the college, we continue to always rise up and say again, this is such a great place. Let's always look forward and not dwell on things that may be of the public really isn't interested in. They want to understand where we're going and how they can participate and how we might facilitate that as Board of Trustees members. Other questions?
Bob is
Oh, you got it.
Ron? There we go. Bob is a great diplomat, as you can see, which is why he's our chair.
Thanks, Mark. Other questions? I've got some other perspectives I'd be happy to share with you if you're interested this afternoon.
Please.
Okay. I guess what I'd like to do is we've had, I think, over the past 2 years or so, Chairman Christian and members of the Regents, conversations with you and Commissioner Stearns and others about how the community colleges, our colleagues in Miles and Dawson, FECC might come together and create stronger dialogue, stronger collaboration between the community colleges and the university system and you folks as the Regents. And I'd like to submit to you that things are better. In fact, I would submit to you they're much better these days. Having come off another grueling legislative session, Jane and I speak probably daily or every other day here, and I think we would go on record as saying that the cooperation and collaboration and the teamwork exhibited through your office, Sheila, Mick Robinson, and a lot of the others, certainly having John Seck in his leadership role, clearly made a difference here. I think we were, for all intents and purposes, locked arms in a unified joint effort to make this happen here. And while we certainly all wish we had more dollars that would come our way for higher education here, I think that there was never this feeling about us versus them. It's all of us together here, and that was very important. So while I think in the past there have been questions about the roles of community colleges, I think that's becoming much more seamless these days, and for that we applaud you. The next thing that I think would be important is that how much we appreciate the role of Deputy Commissioner John Seck as our Deputy Commissioner for two-year education. He's come to campus, he spent a considerable amount of time here. He understands the community college model and the successes that the three community colleges enjoy, and is very supportive of us. We never feel like he wants to take the wind out of his sails for some greater good of higher education here. He is solidly behind us, encouraging and pushing and so forth. Personally, I sit on the College Now advisory board with John and a number of other colleagues in the room here, and this is a good thing here, and I'm proud to serve on behalf of FECC and the other community colleges in that area here. So we sincerely appreciate that. I'd further like to indicate that we'd like to continue to work with you in the area of building stronger community partnerships with regards to the business community, the K-12. By the way, you need to know that the K-12 unions came out in strong support of the incumbents in this last election, just as an aside here. You know what, there's a bond that's, I think, getting stronger between the K-12 world and higher education here. I think we've made a lot of progress in the area of running START programs and things like that, And it was evident again in the support from the K-12 during the recent campaign here. But back again to the university system, the four-year programs with the various abilities to work together on articulations and common course numbering and all of those kinds of things work well for us. And so we just want to go on record with you in that area here. And I think probably before I turn it over to my other colleagues here, as far as what we're seeing here, you know, that we certainly would like to acknowledge the hard work and dedication that Commissioner Stearns has put forth in working with our college here this past year. We're going to be sorry to see you go, and allow us to be the first to offer up our congratulatory dinner here on our campus tonight. Okay, one of probably 400 that you'll probably have over between now and next spring. But again, you know, it's been clearly our pleasure to be here. As I looked at your agenda, I thought, okay, they saved the best for last, the community college trustees, but I know realistically you thought we'd keep our remarks short, Mr. Chairman, and then we'd get to better things here after this. So.
Thanks, Bob.
Thanks, Bob. I certainly appreciate your comments and echo your thoughts. I think we all got together several different times and said, I think if we could communicate a little more, the relationship would build and strengthen, and I think we're all working on doing that, both our staffs and the boards, and I think we're making headway in that. It certainly feels like that on our end too. So we appreciate.
Thank you. We'd second your motion
to visit. Other thoughts, comments?
Well, Sheila, your comments to, or your question as far as the election, one of the things that I would take away from that election was simply the fact that I don't think it was the four incumbents necessarily that won that election. I think it was Flathead Valley Community College, and tremendous respect that the community has for this institution. You know, the board were bit players in it. There was administration, staff, faculty, and student successes that just go over the top. I think that is what really brought four incumbents back to their seats to serve for a couple more years.
I guess I would just like to echo what Bob said about Commissioner Seck spending time on campus, being with us at our monthly board meetings on the phone. He landed here. It's a difficult job, and I think he's bringing a lot of insight and sensitivity to it. So we do appreciate you, John, coming up and seeing us. And the way you folks conduct your affairs is very impressive. I was here for a couple of hours this morning. The civility, the order is something that I think we can all you know, take some lessons from. Not that we don't have that on our board, of course we do. But I particularly, just as a side note, was very impressed by the presentation on the reading assessment program. That was incredible. I wish the other trustees could have been here to appreciate that as well. And then, because we seem to be in the New York Times or some national publication every other day, I thought I knew everything about the institution, but today I learned that we're #1 in organ donor cards. And it looks like the two universities really have some catch-up work to do there.
Right. You didn't know what you were giving, did you, Mark? You know, being on a volunteer board, and honestly, we don't get paid much for this, you know, like the regents do. And, yeah. And it makes it a lot easier when you have an administrator like Dr. Jane Karras. And the staff that she's put together, I mean, they just do all the work, and we really need to support Jane, and we do support Jane in everything that she does. And it makes it awfully easy for, you know, us as trustees to serve on this board, having somebody like Jane. So I can't add much to what everybody else has said, but welcome to the Flathead, and look at that view when you get a chance. And thanks a lot.
Mr. Chair, if I may, This college is very, very fortunate not only to have a fantastic board, and President Karras is very modest about this, but she's not only a board member of the American Association of Community Colleges, but she was elected 2 weeks ago to the executive committee of the American Association of Community Colleges. That's pretty cool.
I really don't have a whole lot more to add, what hasn't already been said. I was kind of the newbie on the board. I was on probably less than a month before I was challenged. But anyway, I'm enjoying becoming more involved with Flathead Valley Community College and working with President Karras. I mean, she's been wonderful as far as orientation and filling me in on what's going on. And again, just to ditto what's been already said, and welcome to the Flathead. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Major Robinson. Major Robinson. Regent Robinson. That happens to be your name also, but
that was my first given name as the title. I have a question, I guess, maybe to President Karras. Certainly with the campus here, it's a beautiful campus, and you can tell by the numbers that you're obviously doing a lot of great things here. And I'm curious, you were talking a little bit about the partnerships and that you have here. Are you partnering at all with your neighbors down the street at the Salish and Kootenai College? I'd like to hear what you might be doing with them as well.
Mr. Chairman, Regent Robinson, we have a number of partnerships with our neighbors, both over the mountains to the east of us, Blackfeet Community College, and Salish Community College to the south of us. And we actually were the college that was the parent college for both of those colleges to get them started. So we have a very close relationship with both of those tribal colleges. And we have shared several programs with those colleges. In fact, Salish's nursing program was a program that was designed to be offered here at FVCC, but because of some complications many years ago, we weren't able to offer it, but we gave all of the curriculum in the program to Salish Kootenai College so that they could begin their nursing program. So their nursing program was actually developed here at FVCC, and as you heard earlier today, we received a $3 million federal grant to expand our nursing program, but in that process, we're also starting a practical nursing program at Blackfeet Community College because we know there's a need for nurses everywhere in the state, especially in the rural areas. And it's a very difficult thing to begin a nursing program. And so we're working with Blackfeet Community College to help them. We'll offer their practical nursing program for the first year or 2 years, and we hope to have them take over that program after 2 years so it becomes the Blackfeet Community College practical nursing program. So those are some of the partnerships that we do have with both of those tribal colleges.
Okay. Other thoughts? Regent Buchanan.
It's so encouraging to see the shift in tone from just a short time ago that these two boards have the opportunity to work together, and I can't thank you all enough, one, for your service and commitment to higher education, and according to some of my friends that live up here, the esprit de corps around FVCC, maybe after the election, but your donor dinner of the other night, sounds like everyone's just as enthused as they've ever been to continue to support the institution. Maybe that's why you had so much challenge, because it's such an elite organization to be a part of. But your philanthropic, energizing, your commitment to supporting Jane and this institution is so well respected, as are the boards of the other community colleges around the state. And having made so much ground, doing large parts of Sheila and John's work, it's very encouraging to think about how we can continue to make those relationships stronger. So a very personal voice of gratitude to you all for the commitment you make to higher ed in the state. It's good to see you guys.
Any other thoughts or questions?
No, just in closing, if that concludes this part, again, we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share our campus with you, invite you back. We enjoy having 200 acres out here. As part of Jane's work that we've done here. We have significantly expanded the footprint of this campus here. That'll be here for long beyond all of us, and there's just a great opportunity here. We've got a 30-year master plan that we need to continue to work on here, or heck, maybe it's only a 5-year, I don't know. But, you know, we've got incredible opportunities here on this campus, and would like to partner with you, and of course, in our community and the folks around here to take it to a whole new level. I know there's always fiscal constraints about these types of things here, but we've got an incredible amount of energy and resources that we have here, and would welcome the opportunity to expand that dialogue here, not perhaps just on this campus, but with other community colleges on opportunities. We're the third, I think the third highest population county in the state. We provide great resources, not just as a 2-year institution, but there's a lot of other opportunities. And so as you think about your plans for the university system and delivering higher education, we hope you'll consider the opportunities we have here, not just because of the acreage we have here, but because of the population and what we can offer the folks here in western Montana. So thank you again for the opportunity to address your board this afternoon, and we welcome you back anytime.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Bob, and thanks to all of you for having us here. We know we're an intrusive bunch, but we enjoy coming to the Flathead and being part of this. So thank you all. I think...
Mr. Chairman, just before you adjourn for the day, I just wanted to make a quick comment about the reception, so whenever you're ready.
Let's just call for public comment. We need opportunity to have public comment on any items not on today's agenda. Any public comment on items not on today's agenda? All right, we'll have another opportunity tomorrow too, but... Okay. Up to the podium over here, if you would.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the board. My name is Stephen Mumblow, and this is Christopher Williams. We're here today representing Montpurg. And once again, thank you for your time. I hope you guys are having a good day in Kalispell. But we're coming to you today to address the recent student vote at the University of Montana for the renewal of the $5 Montpurg refundable fee. As I'm sure you know, we lost that election by less than 70 votes, but campus turned out bigger than ever for this election, largely due to Montpurg's Get Out the Vote campaign. But we're confident that this small margin of defeat is a big indicator that students still value Montpurg and what we do. But we also value the decision of the students to remove our fee structure on campus for this next academic year. And we recommend that you listen to the students' voice when making your final decision. However, we are here today to let you know that we will remain intact as an organization with a strong commitment towards striving towards common goals and campus values. We will be a voice for students next year, regardless of our fee, and we will continue to encourage active participation in our civic world.
Thank you.
In addition, in the last year, Montpurg has shown the importance of student action in political activities through both grassroots organizing and in civic engagement on all three local, state, and national levels. Through the course of this challenging year, we have grown as a chapter and learned how to manage funds and operate a nonprofit effectively. Next year, Montpurg will be looking forward to improving our relationship with students and establishing a positive campus presence. We will be back next spring to work towards our fee once again. Thank you for your time. And now, if there are any questions, I would like to open the floor for that.
Thank you. Anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you. Is there any other public comment? Any other public comment on items not on today's agenda? All right, then I think we're ready to recess. President Karras?
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, members of the board, and meeting attendees, we would invite everybody to join us on our patio for a reception immediately following the meeting. And for those of you who are attending the Chef's Table Dinner, and I'm sorry, invitations might not have gotten to everybody, but for those of you who did RSVP, because it's such a tight area in our teaching kitchen, We've had to assign people to tables just to make sure everybody has a seat. We are maxed out at 75, and we've squeezed everybody in that we can. So there is a place to, when you have your beverage, a place to just check and get a little piece of paper that tells you which table you will be seated at for the dinner. And our students will be serving, our culinary students will be serving some hors d'oeuvres during the reception, so everybody will be able to try some of those. And then for those of you who are joining us for dinner, I think they'll begin seating about 6:15. So, and if you have
Thank
any
you.
questions, just find me, I'll be out there.
Sounds good. So we will recess then for this evening, and we reconvene here tomorrow at 8:30 for the full board. Board members, we have breakfast at 7:15 back here at Flathead Community College. Thank you.